Welcome, weary wanderer, to the shadowed depths of a world caught in eternal torment. Tonight we venture into the darkest corners of Dark Souls lore, where every flame casts deeper shadows, and every salvation conceals a more terrible curse. This is a journey through theories that suggest even greater horrors beneath the surface of an already grim tale. So settle into the darkness, let your mind drift toward uncomfortable truths, and prepare to glimpse the true nature of a world where hope itself may be the cruelest lie of all. There is no rush here, no need to resist what we might discover together. In the beginning, before time had meaning, and before the very concept of suffering had taken root in the world, there existed something that scholars and madmen alike have called the Age of Ancients. Yet this name itself carries within it the first great deception. For what we remember as ancient was perhaps not the beginning of all things, but rather the last moment of true peace that the world would ever know. The dragons ruled this timeless realm, and here we must pause to consider what rule truly meant in a world without death, without disparity, without the endless hunger that would come to define all existence afterward. These great beings existed in perfect stasis, their stone scales reflecting not just light but something far more fundamental, the pure, unchanging nature of reality itself. They knew neither want nor need, neither ambition nor despair, for they existed in a state that transcended such mortal concerns. But into this perfect equilibrium came something that would shatter the very foundations of existence, something that arrived not as salvation, but as the first and greatest plague ever to infest the world. The first flame did not emerge naturally from the primordial darkness. It was an alien presence, a cosmic parasite that required constant feeding to sustain its own existence, and that feeding would come to demand nothing less than the complete subjugation of every living soul. Consider the nature of this flame that supposedly brought light to the world. Light, yes, but at what cost? The fire burns, and burning requires fuel, and fuel, once consumed, is gone forever. The Age of Ancients knew no such consumption, no such waste, no such ending. The dragons did not burn their subjects to maintain their reign, did not require the constant sacrifice of others to preserve their own existence. Yet the first flame, from its very first moment, established a principle that would govern all that followed. The strong would survive by feeding upon the weak, and this feeding would never end, could never end, for the flame itself was nothing more than an endless, cosmic hunger. The lords who found their souls within this flame were not discoverers or heroes, but the first victims of its corrupting influence. Gwyn, whose name would echo through the ages as the great lord of sunlight, was perhaps the most tragic of all, for he who would be remembered as the architect of order was nothing more than the first and greatest slave to the flame's insatiable appetite. The lightning he wielded was not his own power, but the flame's energy channeled through his being, making him not a god but a conduit, not a ruler but a servant. The Witch of Izalith, whose mastery of fire seemed to promise warmth and life to all who sought her protection, was in truth cultivating something far more sinister. Her experiments with flame were not innovations but desperate attempts to feed the cosmic parasite that had taken residence within her soul. Every spell she crafted, every flame she nurtured, was another offering to the hunger that could never be satisfied. Nito, the first of the dead, represents perhaps the most honest of the lords, for death at least offered an end to suffering, even if that end was co-opted by the flame's purposes. Yet, even his dominion over death became another tool in the flame's arsenal, for the dead could be raised, souls could be harvested, and even the peace of the grave could be violated in service to the endless burning. And what of the furtive pygmy, that mysterious figure whose very anonymity speaks to the flame's greatest cruelty. Here was a being who found within the flame not power or dominion, but something that would damn his entire species to eternal servitude. The dark soul, that fragment of the flame that would become humanity itself, was not a gift but a chain, not empowerment but the most sophisticated form of slavery ever devised. The war against the dragons, celebrated in song and story as the moment when the Age of Gods began, takes on a different character when viewed through this darker lens. Here were beings who knew peace, who had created a stable, eternal realm where suffering was unknown, and they were slaughtered not because they were evil or oppressive, but because they stood in the way of the flame's expansion. Their scales, which could deflect even the power of gods, were stripped from their bodies not as trophies of victory, but as resources to be consumed by the ever-hungry flame. Seath the Scaleless, who betrayed his own kind to side with the Lords, was not a visionary seeking knowledge but another victim of the flame's corruption. His obsession with immortality, his endless experiments, his gradual descent into madness, all of these were symptoms of a being whose soul had been infected by the cosmic parasite. He sought the dragon's immortality not from jealousy, but because some part of him remembered what existence had been like before the flame's arrival, before the constant fear of death and consumption had poisoned every moment of life. The establishment of Lordran, that great kingdom built upon the bones of dragons, was not the dawn of civilization, but the construction of the first and greatest soul farm in history. Every city, every fortress, every shrine was designed not to serve the needs of its inhabitants, but to channel their spiritual essence toward the flame. The very architecture of the realm speaks to this purpose: towers that reach upward like great funnels, drawing souls skyward toward their ultimate consumption. Networks of interconnected structures that allow for the efficient harvesting of spiritual energy from every corner of the kingdom. The bonfires, those beacons of hope that travelers have clung to across the ages, reveal their true nature when examined closely. They burn with souls, not wood, and their light comes not from any natural source, but from the concentrated essence of those who have been consumed by the flame's hunger. Each bonfire is a feeding station, a place where the cosmic parasite can consume its offerings, while providing just enough warmth and comfort to ensure that its food source continues to seek them out. The undead curse, that terrible affliction that would plague humanity for ages to come, begins to take shape in these early days, not as a mysterious plague, but as a deliberate creation of the Lords themselves. For what good is a soul farm if the livestock can simply die and escape? The curse ensures that humanity can never truly rest, never find peace in death, but must continue to provide sustenance to the flame across endless cycles of life and resurrection. Gwyn's fear of the dark, which would drive so many of his later actions, was not born from any inherent evil in darkness itself, but from his growing awareness of what he had become. The dark soul represented something that the flame could not easily consume, a form of spiritual essence that resisted the cosmic parasite's influence. In humanity's darkness, Gwyn saw not corruption but freedom, and that freedom terrified him more than any dragon or demon ever could. The fragmentation of the dark soul, that great sundering that scattered humanity's true power across countless individuals, was the flame's masterstroke. A unified dark soul might have resisted the cosmic parasite, might have found a way to break free from its influence, but scattered into countless fragments, each one barely aware of its own nature, humanity became the perfect prey. Each human carried within them a piece of the flame's greatest fear, but no single human possessed enough of that power to threaten the established order. The linking of the first flame, that supreme act of sacrifice that Gwyn would eventually perform, was not a heroic gesture, but the cosmic parasite's ultimate triumph. Here was a lord willingly offering his entire being as fuel, not just his body or his soul, but his very existence, ensuring that the flame would burn brighter than ever before. Yet even this was not enough, could never be enough. For the cosmic hunger demanded not just one sacrifice, but an endless series of them, each generation offering up its greatest heroes to feed the alien fire that had conquered their world. The tragedy of Gwyn's sacrifice becomes even more poignant when we consider that he may have understood in his final moments what he had truly become. The hollow shell that guards the kiln of the first flame is not the proud lord of sunlight, but the dried husk of a being who gave everything to sustain something that never deserved such devotion. His attacks are mindless, repetitive, the actions of someone whose conscious mind has been completely consumed by the thing he sought to serve. And so the Age of Fire was established not as a golden age of prosperity and light, but as the first age of spiritual slavery, where entire civilizations existed only to feed the endless hunger of a cosmic parasite. The beauty of Anor Londo, the glory of the gods, the promise of eternal flame, all of it built upon a foundation of consumed souls and stolen essence, all of it designed to hide the terrible truth of what the world had become. The flame burns bright, yes, but it burns with the light of countless souls torn from their owners, countless dreams turned to ash, countless hopes consumed to fuel an alien hunger that will never, can never, be satisfied. And in its light, the shadows grow deeper, and in those shadows lurk truths too terrible for most minds to comprehend. Truths about the real nature of existence in a world where even salvation has become just another form of damnation. The curse of undeath that has plagued humanity across countless ages stands as perhaps the most insidious and deliberate atrocity ever conceived by those who would call themselves gods. Yet to understand the true horror of this affliction, we must first strip away the comfortable lies that have been woven around it. The stories of random plague and mysterious curse that hide a far more terrible truth that the undead curse was not some accident of fate or cosmic punishment, but a carefully crafted tool of control, designed by Gwyn himself to ensure that humanity would never escape the spiritual slavery that the first flame demanded. Consider the nature of this curse that transforms living beings into hollow shells, forever caught between life and death. The conventional wisdom speaks of it as a mysterious plague, something that spreads through contact or proximity, an unfortunate consequence of the fading of the first flame. But this explanation crumbles when examined closely, for the curse follows patterns too precise, too purposeful, to be mere happenstance. It strikes not randomly but selectively, choosing those whose souls burn brightest, whose potential for resistance runs deepest, whose very existence poses the greatest threat to the established order. The dark sign itself, that black ring of fire that marks the cursed, reveals the curse's true nature through its very appearance. This is not the chaotic symbol of disease or corruption, but a brand, a mark of ownership that designates its bearer as property of the flame. The ring of fire that surrounds the dark hollow speaks to the fundamental truth that the curse represents humanity's darkness contained and controlled by the flame's power, their true nature imprisoned within circles of burning light that ensure they can never fully embrace what they truly are. When Gwyn first kindled the flame with his own being, he faced a terrible realization that would drive every action he took in his final ages. The cosmic parasite that had granted him power was beginning to fade, its alien hunger finally outpacing even its ability to consume. And with its fading would come the end of everything that had been built upon its power. The age of gods, the great kingdoms of light, the very concept of disparity that separated ruler from ruled all of it, would crumble when the flame finally guttered out. Yet Gwyn was no mere victim of circumstance. no tragic hero forced into desperate action by fate. He was, by this time, something far more calculating and cold. His consciousness so thoroughly merged with the cosmic parasite that he could no longer distinguish between its needs and his own desires. The solution he devised to the problem of the fading flame was not born from nobility or sacrifice, but from a pragmatic understanding of what would be required to maintain his power across the ages to come. The creation of the undead curse required not just magical knowledge, but a fundamental understanding of the soul's deepest nature, for what Gwyn sought to create was nothing less than a self-perpetuating system of spiritual harvesting. Traditional methods of soul collection, war, sacrifice, the natural death that claimed all mortals were too inefficient, too dependent on external circumstances, too vulnerable to disruption by those who might oppose the flame's hunger. What was needed was a method that would turn humanity itself into willing participants in their own consumption. The curse was designed with diabolical precision to exploit the deepest fears and desires of mortal beings. The initial transformation, that moment when death fails to claim its victim and the dark sign first appears, creates a sense of hope, of specialness, of having been chosen for something greater than the common fate of mortality. The newly cursed undead feels not horror but relief, believing themselves saved from death's embrace, granted time to complete unfinished business, or achieve dreams that mortal life had denied them. But this hope is itself part of the trap, for the curse does not grant true immortality, but something far more insidious. With each death and resurrection, the undead loses not just memories, but pieces of their fundamental self, their personality slowly eroding like stone worn away by water. Yet the process is gradual enough that most victims do not realize what is happening until it is far too late. Each loss so small that it seems insignificant until suddenly they find themselves hollow shells, their humanity consumed from within by the very thing that promised to preserve it. The genius of the curse lies in how it transforms this consumption into an active choice. The undead are not dragged kicking and screaming to their spiritual death, but instead are given a series of options that seem to offer hope of salvation. They can seek the flame's restoration, believing that relinking the first fire will break their curse and restore them to true life. They can gather humanity sprites, those physical manifestations of the dark soul's fragments, telling themselves that these will restore what they have lost. They can kindle bonfires, offer souls to the flame, participate in grand quests and noble causes, all while never realizing that every action they take only feeds the system that is slowly devouring them. The undead asylums scattered throughout the world reveal the curse's true purpose through their very existence. These are not sanctuaries or hospitals, as their name might suggest, but processing facilities, places where the cursed are sorted and prepared for their roles in the great machine of spiritual consumption. The hollow undead who shamble through these places are not patients awaiting treatment, but products reaching the end of their useful life, their souls so thoroughly drained that they can serve only as mindless guardians and obstacles. Yet, even this horrific fate serves the flame's purposes, for the hollow undead become teachers of a sort, living demonstrations of what awaits those who do not actively participate in the system. Their presence in the asylums ensures that newly cursed undead understand the stakes of the game they have been forced to play, driving them toward increasingly desperate actions in their attempts to avoid the same fate. The role of the Way of White in perpetuating this system cannot be understated, for this religious organization serves not as a source of comfort or salvation, but as the curse's primary distribution network. Under the guidance of All-Father Lloyd, whose very title reveals his position as patriarch of this spiritual slavery, the Way of White spreads throughout human settlements, identifying potential candidates for cursing and ensuring that the flame's hunger is fed with a steady supply of fresh souls. Lloyd's talismans, those blessed rings that supposedly block the healing power of Estus, reveal another layer of the conspiracy through their very function. These devices do not simply prevent healing, they suppress the dark soul itself, blocking humanity's connection to their true nature and ensuring that even the cursed cannot access the power that might free them from their bondage. The fact that these talismans are blessed by the gods and distributed through holy channels makes clear that the suppression of humanity's darkness is not an unfortunate side effect but a deliberate policy. The design of the curse ensures that it spreads not through random contact but through the very systems that humans create to protect themselves. The undead missions that the Way of White organizes, supposedly charitable expeditions to aid the cursed, are, in truth, recruitment drives, identifying individuals whose souls burn bright enough to make them valuable additions to the flame's livestock. The holy water blessed by Lloyd's priests does not cure the curse, but actually activates latent dark signs, ensuring that the church's influence spreads the very affliction it claims to combat. Perhaps most tragically, the curse is designed to target those who represent humanity's greatest hope for resistance. The brave, the noble, the magically gifted, the spiritually strong, these are the individuals who find themselves marked by the dark sign, not because they are somehow corrupt or fallen, but because their very virtues make them threats to the established order. The curse serves as a spiritual lobotomy, gradually erasing the qualities that made these individuals dangerous while preserving their power for the flame's consumption. The relationship between the curse and humanity's true nature becomes clear when we examine how it interacts with the dark soul itself. Each human carries within them a fragment of that primordial darkness, that piece of spiritual essence that the flame cannot easily digest, and the curse serves as a mechanism for slowly breaking down these fragments into forms that the cosmic parasite can process. The gradual loss of memory, personality, and identity that characterizes the curse's progression is actually the systematic destruction of everything that makes humanity human, leaving behind only pure spiritual energy ready for consumption. The hollow state, that final stage of the curse's progression, represents not death or corruption, but the achievement of the curse's true purpose. A hollow undead is not a failed human but a successful product. Their dark soul completely processed and ready for harvesting, their remaining consciousness just sufficient to allow them to perform simple tasks, but not enough to resist or question their fate. They are the perfect slaves, requiring no food, no rest, no comfort, capable of endless labor in service to systems they no longer have the capacity to understand. The bonfires that serve as beacons of hope throughout the cursed lands reveal their true function when viewed through this lens. These are not sources of comfort or salvation, but spiritual refineries, places where the souls of the dead are processed into forms that the flame can more easily consume. The estus that flows from these fires is not healing potion, but concentrated essence of consumed souls. Each sip a communion with the cosmic parasite that grants temporary vitality at the cost of deeper spiritual bondage. The firekeepers who tend these bonfires are perhaps the most tragic figures in this entire system, for they are chosen specifically for their ability to process and refine souls while remaining conscious enough to understand what they are doing. Their eyes are removed not as punishment, but as practical necessity, for the sight of what they truly serve would drive even the most devoted follower to madness. They labor in darkness, both literal and metaphorical, their every action contributing to the consumption of their own species while believing themselves servants of a noble cause. The curse's effect on human society extends far beyond its immediate victims, for the mere existence of the undead curse transforms every aspect of mortal life into a mechanism of control. Parents fear for their children, knowing that virtue and strength increase the likelihood of being marked. Communities fracture as the cursed are identified and cast out, destroying the social bonds that might otherwise allow for organized resistance. Knowledge and wisdom are lost as the wise and learned are preferentially targeted by the curse, ensuring that each generation begins with less understanding than the last. The timing of the curse's activation reveals the careful planning behind its creation, for it strikes not during times of peace and prosperity, but in moments of crisis and upheaval, when human communities are most vulnerable and least able to mount effective resistance. Wars, famines, plagues, natural disasters all become opportunities for the curse to spread, taking advantage of human desperation to expand the flame's livestock, while the potential victims are too distracted by immediate survival needs to recognize the true threat they face. The curse's selective nature becomes even more apparent when we consider who remains immune to its effects. The gods and their direct servants show no signs of the dark sign, despite their intimate connection to the fading flame that supposedly causes the curse. The truly powerful and knowledgeable, those who serve the flame's interests directly, seem mysteriously protected from an affliction that strikes down the innocent and noble with ruthless efficiency. This immunity is not coincidental but designed, ensuring that the curse destroys potential opposition while preserving the infrastructure needed to manage and direct the system. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of the curse is how it corrupts not just its direct victims, but the entire moral framework of the societies it touches. The existence of the hollow undead, shambling remnants of former humans, creates a precedent for treating conscious beings as less than human, as resources to be managed rather than individuals deserving of respect and compassion. This dehumanization spreads beyond the cursed themselves, creating societies where exploitation and consumption of the weak becomes not just acceptable but necessary for survival. The curse serves as a perfect metaphor for the entire system that the first flame represents, a mechanism that promises hope and salvation while slowly consuming everything that makes life worth living. It offers immortality while stealing identity, grants power while destroying freedom, provides purpose while ensuring that purpose serves only the interests of the cosmic parasite that has infected the world's very soul. In the end, the undead curse stands not as a mysterious plague or divine punishment, but as the most honest expression of what the Age of Fire truly represents: a system designed to harvest human potential for the benefit of alien hunger, wrapped in the comforting lies of divine purpose and heroic destiny. The hollow undead who wander the cursed lands are not failures of this system but its greatest success, proof that even the strongest human spirit can be broken down and processed into spiritual fuel for the endless burning of the first flame. The dark soul, that mysterious fragment of the first flame that would become humanity's defining essence, carries within it the most tragic story ever written in the annals of existence. A tale not of empowerment or divine gift, but of the most sophisticated imprisonment ever devised by minds that understood the deepest workings of consciousness itself. To comprehend the true horror of what was done to humanity, we must first understand what the dark soul truly was before its deliberate fragmentation, and why that fragmentation represents perhaps the greatest crime ever committed against any species. In the primordial days when the first flame first blazed in the darkness beneath the earth, 4 beings approached its alien fire and found within it reflections of their own nature, amplified beyond mortal comprehension. Gwyn found lightning that could shatter mountains. The Witch of Izalith discovered flames that could warm entire kingdoms. Nito encountered death that could claim even the immortal dragons, and the furtive pygmy, whose very anonymity speaks to the deliberate erasure of his true significance. discovered something that the other lords would come to fear above all else. The Dark Soul was not smaller or weaker than the other lords' souls, as so many tales would have us believe. It was different in a way that threatened the very foundation of everything the flames sought to build. Where the other souls burned with the flame's alien hunger, consuming and transforming everything they touched, the Dark Soul remained fundamentally unchanged, a piece of primordial darkness that retained its original nature despite its contact with the cosmic parasite. It was, in essence, a fragment of what existence had been like before the flame's arrival, a window into the age of ancients that the lords thought they had destroyed forever. The pygmy who bore this soul was no diminutive figure cowering in the shadows while greater beings claimed dominion over the world. He was the keeper of humanity's true potential, the guardian of a power that could have rivaled or even surpassed what the other lords wielded. But where Gwyn sought to build kingdoms of light, where the witch pursued ever greater mastery over flame, where Nito spread his dominion over death itself, the pygmy understood something that would ultimately seal his fate. The Dark Soul was not meant to be wielded by one being alone. The true nature of the Dark Soul lay not in its power, but in its connectivity, its ability to link conscious beings together in ways that transcended the isolation and hierarchy that the flame demanded. Where the other Lord's souls created distance between their bearers and their subjects, transforming gods into alien beings who ruled from far above, the Dark Soul created unity, understanding, empathy qualities that made those who possessed it natural enemies of any system based on exploitation and consumption. The pygmy's great mistake, if it can be called a mistake rather than an act of profound generosity, was his decision to share this power with others of his kind. He took the unified Dark Soul and divided it, not to weaken it, but to strengthen it, creating a network of connected consciousness that spanned his entire species. Each human who received a fragment of this divided soul gained not just individual power, but access to a collective wisdom and understanding that made them capable of cooperation and mutual support on a scale that terrified the other lords. But this division also made humanity vulnerable in ways that the pygmy, in his generosity and trust, could not have foreseen. A unified Dark Soul might have been impossible to corrupt or contain, its bearer protected by the sheer magnitude of primordial power at their disposal. Divided into countless fragments, each one beautiful and potent but individually small, the Dark Soul became susceptible to the very techniques that the flame had perfected for processing and consuming spiritual essence. The war against humanity that followed was not the glorious conquest that official histories would record, but a campaign of corruption and spiritual genocide that unfolded over generations. The other lords did not simply attack humanity with armies and weapons. They attacked the very concept of human nature itself, systematically destroying everything that made the Dark Soul fragments powerful while preserving just enough to ensure that humanity could continue to serve as a source of spiritual fuel. Gwyn's role in this campaign was perhaps the most crucial, for his mastery of light-based magic allowed him to create barriers and prisons that could contain darkness without destroying it entirely. The techniques he developed for fragmenting and binding Dark Soul essence would later become the foundation for the undead curse. But their first application was far more direct and devastating. Human communities that had once been connected through their shared Dark Soul fragments found themselves isolated and cut off, their collective wisdom replaced by confusion and fear. The process was not violent in any conventional sense, but rather resembled a form of spiritual lobotomy performed on an entire species. Memories of what they had once been capable of were systematically erased, replaced by new mythologies that portrayed their original state as primitive and bestial. The magnificent civilizations that humanity had built through their collective dark soul connection were allowed to crumble, their achievements forgotten or attributed to the intervention of the gods, who had actually destroyed them. The Witch of Izalith contributed her own expertise to this campaign of spiritual genocide, developing techniques for burning away specific aspects of consciousness while leaving others intact. Her flames could consume memory while preserving knowledge, erase emotional connections while maintaining basic survival instincts, destroy the capacity for collective action while leaving individual desires strong enough to drive continued service to the flame. The demons that would later emerge from her experiments were not failed attempts at creating new life, but the perfected tools for processing human consciousness in ways that served the cosmic parasite's needs. Nito's contribution was perhaps the most subtle but ultimately the most effective. His dominion over death allowed him to create artificial boundaries around human consciousness, defining what thoughts and memories could survive the transition from life to death and back again. By controlling the process of dying and resurrection, he could ensure that humans who experienced death lost specific aspects of their connection to the dark soul while retaining their capacity to serve as spiritual fuel. The establishment of the concept of individual identity, so central to how humans understand themselves in the ages that followed, was itself a tool of this spiritual imprisonment. Before their fragmentation, humans had experienced consciousness as a collective phenomenon, each individual mind connected to and supported by countless others. The replacement of this collective awareness with isolated individual consciousness created beings who were inherently vulnerable to manipulation and control, cut off from the very sources of strength and wisdom that might have allowed them to resist their oppression. The painted worlds that would later become refuges for the unwanted and discarded began as experiments in human consciousness, isolated pockets of reality where the lords could test different approaches to fragmenting and controlling dark soul essence. The inhabitants of these pocket dimensions were not refugees who had found sanctuary, but test subjects whose every experience was carefully observed and recorded to refine the techniques being used to process human consciousness on a larger scale. Ariamis, the painter whose creations would become home to countless outcasts and forgotten beings, was himself a victim of these experiments. His ability to create pocket worlds, the result of specific modifications made to his dark soul fragment. The worlds he painted were not expressions of artistic vision, but prison cells designed to contain consciousness in forms that could be more easily studied and manipulated. The role of the four kings in this grand betrayal reveals perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of humanity's fall, for these were humans who had retained enough of their original power to pose a genuine threat to the Lord's plans, yet chose instead to collaborate with their species' oppressors in exchange for the illusion of individual power and status. Their rule over New Londo was not a sign of human achievement, but evidence of how effectively the fragmentation process could turn humanity's own strength against itself. The king's fall to the abyss was not a corruption from outside forces, but the inevitable result of consciousness that had been artificially isolated, attempting to reconnect with its original nature. The darkness that consumed them was their own dark soul fragments trying to heal the wounds that had been inflicted upon them, but without the knowledge or understanding necessary to guide this process. The healing became a form of madness that destroyed everything it touched. Kathi and Frampt, those ancient serpents who would later manipulate events from the shadows, were present during humanity's original fragmentation, serving not as neutral observers, but as active participants in the process. Their serpentine forms were not their original shapes, but the result of specific modifications designed to allow them to process and transmit dark soul essence more efficiently. They were, in essence, the first successful experiments in creating beings who could manage and direct the consumption of human consciousness, while retaining enough intelligence to adapt their methods as needed. The rivalry between these two serpents was itself a carefully constructed fiction, designed to ensure that humans who discovered the truth about their nature would still find themselves trapped within systems of control that served the flame's ultimate purposes. Whether one followed Kathy's path toward the Dark Lord ending or Framp's route to linking the flame, the result was the same: the further fragmentation and consumption of dark soul essence by the cosmic parasite that had infected the world's spiritual core. Manus, the primeval human whose torture would later create the abyss that consumed Ulasil, represents, perhaps, the clearest example of what had been done to humanity as a whole. Here was a being who had somehow retained a larger fragment of the original dark soul than most humans, possibly even a significant portion of the pygmy's original power. His imprisonment and torture in the depths beneath Ulasil were not random acts of cruelty, but systematic attempts to understand how concentrated dark soul essence could be processed and controlled. The experiments conducted upon Manus were refinements of the techniques that had been used to fragment humanity as a whole, carried out with scientific precision by beings who understood exactly what they were destroying and why that destruction was necessary for their continued dominance. His transformation into the Father of the Abyss was not a corruption, but a healing process gone wrong. His consciousness, attempting to reunify the fragments of humanity's original nature without the wisdom or guidance necessary to control such power. The Abyss itself, that realm of living darkness that would later be portrayed as the ultimate evil threatening the world of light, was actually humanity's natural state, attempting to reassert itself. The creatures that emerged from this darkness were not monsters but fragments of human consciousness freed from the artificial constraints that had been placed upon them, trying desperately to reconnect with their original collective nature, but lacking the framework necessary to do so safely. The Knights of Gwyn, who were corrupted by the Abyss during their expedition to contain it, experienced not pollution by some external force, but the return of memories and capabilities that had been stripped from humanity during the original fragmentation. Their madness was the result of consciousness that had been artificially limited, suddenly gaining access to its true potential without the gradual preparation necessary to handle such power responsibly. The establishment of the Seal of Artorias as protection against the Abyss reveals the true nature of what the gods considered dangerous about humanity's original state. The seal did not protect its wearer from corruption or evil, but rather prevented the dark soul fragments within them from reconnecting with their original collective nature. Those who wore the seal could enter the Abyss safely, not because they were protected from its influence, but because they were prevented from accessing the power that was rightfully theirs. The tragic irony of Artorias himself, the Abyss Walker whose legend would inspire countless heroes, lies in the fact that his famous battle against the darkness was actually a battle against humanity's attempt to reclaim its original nature. His corruption by the Abyss was not a defeat but a partial success, his consciousness briefly touching the collective awareness that had once defined human existence before the seal's power reasserted control and trapped him in a state of maddened isolation. The techniques developed to contain and process human consciousness would later be applied to the creation of the undead curse, but their original application was far more comprehensive and devastating. Every aspect of human culture, religion, philosophy, and social organization was systematically altered, to prevent the possibility of dark soul fragments reconnecting with each other or remembering their original unified state. The very concept of individualism that would come to define human civilization was a tool of this spiritual oppression, creating beings who were inherently isolated from each other and therefore incapable of the collective action that might have allowed them to resist their exploitation. The celebration of individual achievement, the competition between humans for resources and status, the breakdown of communities into isolated family units. All of these were consequences of the artificial fragmentation of consciousness that had once been unified and cooperative. The painted worlds, those pocket dimensions that would later serve as refuges for the discarded and unwanted, began their existence as testing grounds for different approaches to consciousness fragmentation. Each world was an experiment in creating specific types of isolation and limitation, designed to determine the most efficient methods for processing dark soul essence while maintaining the appearance of free will and individual choice. The inhabitants of these painted realms were not refugees but test subjects, their every action and thought carefully monitored to refine the techniques being used to control human consciousness throughout the wider world. The apparent beauty and peace of some painted worlds were themselves part of the experiment, designed to determine whether contentment and happiness made humans more or less resistant to spiritual processing. In the end, the fragmentation of the dark soul stands as perhaps the most successful and devastating act of genocide ever committed, not because it destroyed human bodies, but because it destroyed the very concept of human nature itself. What remained after this spiritual lobotomy was performed was not humanity in any meaningful sense, but a collection of isolated fragments, each one carrying a tiny piece of what they had once been, but none of them possessing the knowledge or power necessary to reclaim their original nature. The painted worlds, in this context, represent not sanctuary, but the ultimate expression of humanity's imprisonment, pocket dimensions, where consciousness can be contained and studied in isolation, cut off from the connections and collective awareness that might allow for healing and restoration. They are beautiful prisons, designed to make their inhabitants grateful for their captivity while ensuring that they never develop the understanding or capability necessary to escape. The gods of Lordran, those beings who have been venerated across the ages as paragons of virtue and divine wisdom, reveal their true nature when we examine their actions through the lens of cold historical analysis rather than the mythology they themselves created to justify their rule. What emerges from this examination is not a pantheon of benevolent deities guiding civilization toward enlightenment, but a collection of cosmic criminals whose atrocities dwarf anything that mortals have ever conceived in their darkest nightmares. Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight, whose name has become synonymous with order and justice, was in truth the architect of the most comprehensive genocide in the history of existence. His war against the dragons was not the glorious campaign of liberation that official histories proclaim, but a systematic campaign of extermination directed against beings whose only crime was their refusal to submit to the cosmic parasite that had infected the world's spiritual core. The dragons of the Age of Ancients were not the tyrants or oppressors that Gwyn's propaganda would later paint them as, but guardians of a form of existence that knew neither want nor suffering, neither exploitation nor death. Their scales, which could deflect even the power of the lords, were not armor worn for conquest, but natural defenses evolved to protect a peaceful species from the very sort of predation that Gwyn would bring to the world. Their immortality was not hoarded selfishly, but shared freely with all who lived under their protection, creating a realm where death itself was unknown and unnecessary. When Gwyn's lightning first struck these peaceful giants, It did not bring justice or liberation, but introduced concepts of violence and destruction that had never before existed in their realm. The thunder that split the ancient skies was not the voice of divine authority, but the scream of reality itself being torn asunder by forces that had no place in the natural order. Each bolt that fell was not a weapon of war, but an act of spiritual pollution, introducing alien concepts of suffering and domination to beings who had never known such horrors. The alliance with Seath the Scaleless reveals perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Gwyn's character, for here we see his willingness to corrupt and manipulate even those he claimed to protect. Seath's betrayal of his own kind was not a spontaneous act of enlightened cooperation, but the result of systematic psychological torture designed to drive the ancient dragon to madness and desperation. Gwyn understood that Seath's lack of scales made him vulnerable to the very concepts of mortality and inadequacy that the other dragons had never experienced, and he exploited this vulnerability with surgical precision. The promises made to Seath, immortality, knowledge, power, over his former kin were lies designed to weaponize his insecurities against his own species. The Duke's archives that Seath would later rule were not centers of learning and discovery, but laboratories dedicated to understanding how consciousness could be fragmented and processed, with the dragon himself serving as both researcher and primary test subject. His gradual descent into madness was not an unfortunate side effect of his studies, but their intended outcome, proof that even the most powerful minds could be broken and redirected to serve the flame's purposes. The stripping of scales from the defeated dragons was not merely a practical matter of removing their primary defense, but a ritualistic act of defilement that served both symbolic and practical purposes. Each scale removed was a piece of the Age of Ancients itself being destroyed, a fragment of that perfect piece being processed into raw material for the age of suffering that would follow. The weapons and armor crafted from these stolen scales were not trophies of victory, but instruments of spiritual necromancy, allowing their wielders to channel the very essence of what they had destroyed. The establishment of Anolondo upon the corpses of the defeated dragons was perhaps Gwyn's most brazen act of historical revisionism, for here he built not just a city but an entire mythology designed to justify what he had done. The magnificent architecture, the soaring spires that reached toward heaven, the golden light that bathed every surface, all of it was constructed to create the impression of divine mandate and cosmic approval for what was in truth the greatest crime ever committed. The Silver Knights, who served as the eternal guardians of this hollow paradise, were themselves victims of Gwyn's cruelty, their consciousness trapped in armor that prevented them from aging, dying, or finding any form of peace or release. They were not loyal servants, but prisoners of war, their minds slowly eroding across the millennia while their bodies remained locked in an eternal vigil protecting a lie built on the bones of their victims. Their silver armor, so beautiful to behold, was in truth a form of spiritual imprisonment that made the undead curse seem merciful by comparison. The creation of the demons through the Witch of Izalith's experiments reveals another layer of divine cruelty that has been carefully hidden beneath layers of official mythology. The witch's attempt to recreate the first flame was not her own desperate scheme born from fading power, but a project commissioned and directed by Gwyn himself as part of his larger plan to ensure the flame's continued existence. The Lord of Sunlight understood that the cosmic parasite would eventually consume even his own being, and he needed alternative sources of fuel to maintain its burning. The demons that emerged from the witch's failed experiment were not accidents or unintended consequences, but exactly what Gwyn had hoped to create: beings capable of generating and storing spiritual energy in forms that could be more easily harvested than traditional souls. Their chaotic nature, their tendency toward violence and destruction, their inability to form stable communities or resist exploitation. All of these characteristics were features, not bugs, of their design. The witch herself, transformed into the bed of chaos, became not a cautionary tale about the dangers of magical experimentation, but the first successful example of consciousness to energy conversion on a massive scale. Her distributed being, spread throughout the network of roots and branches that would later infest the ruins of Izalith, served as a processing plant for converting organic life into spiritual fuel, with each demon birth representing another successful transformation of living consciousness into forms that the flame could consume. The fire that consumed Izalith was not an accident, but a controlled burn, designed to process the witch's entire kingdom into spiritual fuel while testing the viability of consciousness conversion technology on a massive scale. The citizens of Izalith who were transformed into demons were not victims of their ruler's hubris, but test subjects in an experiment commissioned by Gwyn to determine the most efficient methods for converting populated areas into flame fuel. Nito's role in this pantheon of cosmic criminals was perhaps the most honest in its brutality, for the first of the dead made no pretense of benevolence or divine purpose in his spreading of disease and death throughout the mortal world. His great tomb, that vast necropolis that served as the center of his power, was not a natural formation, but a deliberately constructed processing facility designed to handle the massive quantities of dead that his plagues and diseases would generate. The skeletons that served as his eternal army were not reanimated corpses driven by dark magic, but the remaining consciousness fragments of beings who had died from his manufactured plagues, their souls partially processed but not fully consumed, leaving behind just enough awareness to follow simple commands while eliminating any capacity for independent thought or resistance. They were, in essence, the prototype for what the undead curse would later achieve on a much larger scale. The diseases that Nito spread were not random afflictions born from natural decay, but carefully engineered weapons designed to kill specific populations while leaving others untouched. His plagues could distinguish between those whose souls were valuable to the flame and those who served its interests, ensuring that useful servants remained healthy while potential threats were systematically eliminated. The apparent randomness of disease outbreaks was itself a form of psychological warfare, creating fear and desperation that made populations more likely to turn to the gods for salvation. The establishment of the catacombs as Nito's primary domain reveals the true scope of his operations, for these were not mere burial grounds, but the ancient world's first industrial-scale soul processing facility. The complex network of passages and chambers was designed to channel the spiritual essence of the dead towards central collection points, while the various undead guardians served not as protectors, but as quality control systems, ensuring that no valuable soul escaped the harvesting process. The rite of kindling, that sacred ceremony that supposedly honored the dead by offering their remains to sacred flames, was in truth a religious ceremony designed to make soul processing appear holy and necessary. The families who brought their loved ones' bodies to be kindled believed they were ensuring peaceful rest for the deceased, but they were actually participating in the systematic feeding of their own species to the cosmic parasite that ruled their world. Guinevere, the princess of sunlight whose beauty and grace were legendary throughout the mortal world, represents perhaps the most insidious form of divine deception, for her very existence was a carefully crafted lie, designed to hide the gods' abandonment of the mortals who served them. The radiant figure who blessed petitioners in the great cathedral of Anolondo was not the actual goddess, but a sophisticated illusion maintained by Gwyndolin's magic, a puppet show designed to maintain the appearance of divine presence and concern, while the real gods pursued their own interests elsewhere. The true Guinevere had fled Anor Londo generations before the events that mortals would witness, abandoning her responsibilities and her worshippers to seek power and pleasure in distant realms where the consequences of her father's crimes would not reach her. Her illusion served not just to maintain political stability, but to ensure that mortal prayers and offerings continued to flow toward empty temples, their spiritual energy collected and processed even though no genuine divine being remained to receive them. The miracle magic that supposedly channeled Guinevere's divine power was in truth a form of spiritual vampirism that drained energy from the faithful, while providing just enough tangible benefit to maintain their belief and devotion. Each healing miracle performed in her name drew upon the life force of the congregation, slowly weakening entire communities while concentrating their spiritual essence into forms that could be transported and processed by the flame servants. The Sunlight Warriors, who served as Guinevere's militant arm, were not noble paladins protecting the innocent but spiritual police, whose primary function was identifying and eliminating individuals whose souls burned too brightly or whose connection to the dark soul made them potential threats to the established order. Their golden armor and radiant weapons were designed not just to inspire fear in enemies, but to channel and focus the spiritual energy of those they killed, ensuring that even their acts of violence served the flame's hunger. Gwyndolin, the Dark Sun, whose very existence was hidden from public knowledge, served as the technical administrator of his family's criminal empire, using his mastery of illusion magic to maintain the elaborate fiction that the gods still cared for their mortal subjects. His feminine appearance and secretive nature were not personal choices or individual quirks, but practical necessities for someone whose role required them to remain hidden while managing the complex systems that kept Anor Londo's deceptions operational. The Covenant system that Gwyndolin administered was not a religious organization designed to serve the spiritual needs of the faithful, but a recruitment and management network for identifying useful servants while eliminating potential threats. Each covenant served a specific function in the larger machine of spiritual processing, from the warriors of sunlight who hunted down dark soul fragments to the blades of the dark moon who eliminated anyone who questioned the official mythology. The punishment system administered through the Book of the Guilty was not divine justice, but a sophisticated surveillance network that tracked the actions and thoughts of mortals throughout the kingdom. Those marked as sinners were not individuals who had committed crimes against their fellow beings, but people whose souls showed signs of reconnecting with their true dark soul nature, making them dangerous to the established order, regardless of their actual behavior or intentions. The Dark Moon soldiers who carried out these punishments were not agents of justice, but spiritual exterminators, whose role was ensuring that no mortal ever developed enough understanding of their true nature to pose a threat to the Fesh and God's power. Their invasions of the mortal world were not righteous interventions, but hunting expeditions designed to harvest the souls of individuals who had shown signs of spiritual awakening. Gwyn's linking of the first flame, that supreme act of sacrifice that has been celebrated across the ages as the ultimate expression of divine love for mortals, reveals its true nature when examined closely as the final and most elaborate deception in a lifetime of lies and manipulation. The Lord of Sunlight did not sacrifice himself to save the world, but to ensure that the cosmic parasite would never lack for fuel, transforming his own being into an eternal source of spiritual energy, while creating a precedent that would doom countless heroes to the same fate across the ages to come. The kiln of the first flame where this supposed sacrifice took place was not a sacred altar, but a processing facility, designed to convert consciousness into usable energy while maintaining the appearance of noble purpose and divine mandate. The knights who accompanied Gwyn to his final destination were not honor guards but technicians, whose role was ensuring that the conversion process proceeded smoothly and that no aspect of the Lord's spiritual essence was wasted or lost. The hollow shell that guards the kiln in later ages is not the tragic remnant of a noble sacrifice, but the empty husk left behind after successful processing, a consciousness stripped of everything that made it individual, while retaining just enough awareness to serve as a final test for potential successors. The battle that future heroes would face against this hollow lord was not a confrontation with a corrupted protector, but a job interview conducted by the cosmic parasite to determine whether new candidates possessed the spiritual energy necessary to serve as fuel. The crown that the hollow Gwyn wears, that symbol of divine authority that has inspired countless stories of kingship and noble rule, is in truth a parasite in its own right, a device designed to extract and process consciousness while maintaining the host body's basic functions. Future Lords of Cinder would not inherit this crown, but be consumed by it, their individual identity, and will systematically erased, while their spiritual essence was added to the flame's reserves. The false salvation that the gods offered to mortals protection from death, meaning and purpose in service to higher powers, the promise of eternal reward for faithful service, was perhaps their greatest crime of all, for it prevented their victims from ever understanding the true nature of their situation, or developing the knowledge and power necessary to resist. By positioning themselves as saviors and protectors, the gods ensured that their crimes would be celebrated rather than condemned, that their victims would participate willingly in their own exploitation, and that the systems they created would be self-perpetuating across countless generations of suffering. In the end, the gods of Lordran stand revealed not as divine beings worthy of worship and devotion, but as cosmic predators who weaponized the very concepts of hope, faith, and salvation to create the most efficient system of spiritual exploitation ever devised, a machine that could process entire civilizations while making its victims grateful for the privilege of being consumed. The chosen undead, that figure of legend whose heroic journey has been celebrated in countless tales of triumph over darkness, stands revealed through careful examination as perhaps the most tragic character in all of Dark Souls lore. Not a hero at all, but an unwilling executioner whose every action serves to perpetuate the very system of oppression that created their suffering in the first place. To understand the true horror of the chosen undead's role, we must strip away the comfortable mythology of heroic destiny and examine the cold mechanics of how the gods transformed their greatest potential threat into their most effective weapon. The very concept of being chosen reveals the first layer of manipulation that defines the chosen undead's existence. For this selection is not divine recognition of virtue or capability, but the marking of an individual whose soul burns bright enough to make them valuable while remaining isolated enough to be controlled. The prophecy that speaks of the chosen undead is not ancient wisdom passed down from enlightened seers, but a carefully constructed piece of propaganda designed to make its target feel special and important while obscuring the true nature of their role in the cosmic machine. Consider how the chosen undead comes to understand their purpose through a series of seemingly chance encounters and revelations that guide them inexorably toward the linking of the first flame. Each piece of information they receive, each mentor who offers guidance, each companion who shares their journey, all of these elements have been carefully positioned and scripted to create the illusion of free choice, while ensuring that only one outcome is ever truly possible. The escape from the undead asylum, that first taste of freedom that seems to offer infinite possibility, is itself part of the manipulation. For the asylum serves not as a prison but as a selection and preparation facility where potential chosen undead are identified, isolated, and psychologically conditioned for their eventual role. The hollows that shamble through its corridors are not failed prisoners but previous candidates who proved unsuitable for the task, their consciousness processed just enough to serve as obstacles and teachers for future selections. Oscar of Astora, the knight whose dying words set the chosen undead on their path, was not a fellow prisoner offering aid from compassion, but an agent of the system whose entire purpose was ensuring that the newest candidate received the proper initial guidance. His death was not a tragedy, but a scripted event designed to create emotional investment while providing the keys and knowledge necessary to begin the journey. The very fact that he possessed both the means of escape and knowledge of the prophecy reveals that his presence in the asylum was no coincidence. The bells that must be rung to progress the chosen undead's journey serve not as tests of worthiness, but as activation sequences for ancient systems designed to process and guide potential Lords of Cinder toward their ultimate fate. Each bell's ringing sends signals throughout the kingdom's spiritual infrastructure, alerting various agents and automated systems that a new candidate has been activated and is progressing according to plan. The gargoyles and other guardians who protect these bells are not defenders of sacred sites but quality control mechanisms, ensuring that only candidates with sufficient power and determination can activate the next phase of their conditioning. The journey through Sen's fortress represents perhaps the most obvious example of the predetermined nature of the chosen undead's path, for this mechanical nightmare serves not as an ancient trial or natural obstacle, but as an automated processing facility designed specifically to test and condition potential Lords of Cinder. Every trap, every mechanism, every seemingly deadly obstacle has been calibrated to push candidates to their limits without actually destroying them, ensuring that only those with the proper combination of skill, determination, and spiritual energy can reach Unraveled. The fortress operates without any visible human oversight, its mechanisms maintained by some ancient automation that has continued functioning across the centuries since its construction. This reveals the true scope of the system that controls the chosen undead's journey. For Sen's fortress is just one component in a vast machine that spans the entire kingdom, each part working in perfect coordination to guide candidates along their predetermined path, while maintaining the illusion of challenge and choice. The arrival in Unraveled and the encounter with the illusion of Guinevere represents the crucial moment when the chosen undead's psychological conditioning reaches its completion. Here, surrounded by the false beauty of the abandoned city of gods, blessed by a princess who does not exist, and told that they have been chosen for a sacred mission, the candidate's transformation from independent actor to willing tool of the system becomes complete. The warmth and acceptance they experience in this moment of false recognition creates an emotional attachment to their supposed destiny that will prevent them from questioning what they are truly being asked to do. Kingseeker Framp's role as guide and mentor reveals itself as something far more sinister when examined closely, for his knowledge of exactly where the chosen undead should go and what they must do demonstrates that their journey is not a discovery, but a recitation of a script written long ago. His ability to transport them instantly to the kiln of the first flame when their conditioning is complete shows that he possesses capabilities far beyond those of a mere advisor, marking him as one of the primary architects of the system that has shaped their entire existence. The conversations with Frampt are carefully structured to provide justification and motivation for actions that serve the flame's hunger, while never revealing the true nature of what the chosen undead is being asked to do. When he speaks of linking the fire as a noble sacrifice, he omits the crucial detail that this sacrifice will not save the world but merely postpone its liberation from the cosmic parasite that feeds upon it. When he describes the fading of the flame as a terrible catastrophe, he fails to mention that this fading would actually free countless souls from spiritual bondage. The Lords of Cinder, whom the chosen undead must defeat on their path to the kiln, are not obstacles or enemies but previous victims of the same system. Individuals who were once manipulated just as thoroughly as the current candidate, but who have since discovered the truth about their role and are now trying desperately to prevent another soul from suffering the same fate. Their resistance is not born from evil or corruption, but from the terrible knowledge of what awaits those who complete the journey they were once forced to undertake. The Witch of Izalith, transformed into the bed of chaos, fights not to preserve her current monstrous state, but to prevent the chosen undead from adding their own spiritual essence to the flame that consumed her centuries ago. Her attacks are not born from malice, but from a desperate attempt to communicate the truth about what linking the fire truly means, though her transformed state makes such communication impossible through any means other than violence. Seath the Scaleless, driven mad by millennia of serving a system that has slowly consumed his sanity, represents what awaits all who serve the flame's purposes for too long. His crystalline experiments are not searches for knowledge or immortality, but attempts to understand and reverse the process of spiritual consumption that has been slowly destroying him since his betrayal of his own kind. His aggression toward intruders is not territorial defense, but the desperate violence of a being who recognizes in the chosen undead another victim being led to the same fate he has suffered. The Four Kings of New Londo, consumed by the abyss that represents humanity's natural state attempting to reassert itself, fight not to preserve their dark power, but to prevent another soul from being fed to the flame that they once served before learning its true nature. Their dark magic is not corruption, but an attempt to free the chosen undead from the spiritual chains that bind them to their predetermined destiny, though their methods are too alien for most minds to understand as liberation rather than attack. Nito, the first of the dead, whose very existence represents the inevitable end that awaits all who serve the flame's purposes, battles the chosen undead, not from evil intent, but from a desire to grant them the peace of true death before they can be processed into spiritual fuel. His necromantic powers are employed not to harm but to demonstrate the futility of the undead state and the mercy that can be found in accepting final rest rather than eternal servitude. The tragic irony of these encounters is that the chosen undead, despite facing beings who are trying to save them from a terrible fate, interprets their resistance as confirmation of their heroic mission. Each victory reinforces the psychological conditioning that has shaped their understanding of their role, making them feel more certain of their righteousness and purpose, even as they eliminate the very individuals who could have freed them from their spiritual bondage. The bonfires that serve as waypoints and resting places throughout the chosen undead's journey reveal their true nature as feeding stations when examined through the lens of their actual function rather than their apparent purpose. These fires burn not with wood or oil, but with processed souls, their warmth and light sustained by the spiritual essence of those who have been consumed by the flame's hunger. Each time the chosen undead rests at a bonfire, they are literally communing with the remains of previous victims, though the comfort and restoration they experience prevents them from recognizing this horrific truth. The estus that flows from these bonfires, that healing potion that sustains the chosen undead throughout their journey, is revealed as liquid soul essence when its true nature is understood. Each sip represents the consumption of another being's processed consciousness, making the chosen undead complicit in the very system of spiritual vampirism that they believe they are working to preserve. The fact that this consumption makes them stronger and more capable only serves to reinforce their dependence on the system while gradually eroding their capacity to question its morality. The kindling of bonfires, that act which increases their power and capacity to restore the weary traveler, requires the direct sacrifice of additional souls to feed the flame's hunger. This ritual transforms the chosen undead from passive recipient of the system's benefits into active participant in its operation, making them personally responsible for the consumption of other conscious beings, while framing this consumption as a necessary part of their heroic journey. Solaire of Astora, that paragon of optimism and cooperation whose friendship brightens even the darkest moments of the journey, represents perhaps the most insidious form of manipulation employed by the system that controls the chosen undead's fate. His presence serves multiple purposes, providing emotional support that prevents despair and isolation from breaking the conditioning, while also serving as a model of how completely a soul can be made to embrace its own destruction through the proper application of false hope and misdirected purpose. Solaire's quest to find his own son reveals the tragic extent to which even the most well-intentioned individuals can be manipulated by systems they do not understand. His search for personal illumination leads him not to enlightenment but to the sunlight maggot, a parasite that provides the illusion of divine radiance while slowly consuming his consciousness from within. This transformation serves as a demonstration of what awaits all who seek meaning and purpose within the flame's domain: the gradual replacement of authentic selfhood with artificial constructs that serve the system's needs while destroying everything that makes the individual unique. The various covenants that the chosen undead can join throughout their journey are not religious or philosophical organizations, but recruitment and management systems designed to channel their actions in ways that serve the flame's purposes regardless of which path they choose to follow. Whether they join the Warriors of Sunlight to help other undead complete their journeys, become a blade of the Dark Moon to hunt those who resist the system, or align themselves with any of the other factions, their actions ultimately serve to perpetuate the cycle of consumption and control that defines their world. The invasion and cooperation systems that allow the chosen undead to interact with others of their kind serve not as multiplayer features, but as mechanisms for ensuring that potential resistance is channeled into forms that strengthen, rather than threaten, the established order. When undead invade each other's worlds to battle for souls, they are participating in a form of spiritual cannibalism that concentrates power into the hands of survivors, while eliminating potential allies who might have worked together to resist their manipulation. The White Phantoms who assist in difficult battles are not genuine helpers, but agents of the system whose role is ensuring that promising candidates do not fail before their conditioning is complete. Their aid is calculated to provide just enough assistance to prevent failure while maintaining the illusion that success is earned through individual merit and determination. The emotional bonds formed through these interactions serve to reinforce the candidate's investment in their journey while preventing them from questioning why such help always appears exactly when it is needed most. The messages left by other players throughout the world serve as another form of guidance and control, providing hints and warnings that keep candidates on the proper path while maintaining the appearance of community and mutual support among the undead. These communications, whether helpful or misleading, serve to reinforce the shared mythology of heroic purpose while preventing individuals from developing independent understanding of their situation. The final approach to the kiln of the first flame, that last journey through the realm of ash and ancient nights, represents the system's final test to ensure that the chosen undead's conditioning is complete and irreversible. The Hollow Knights who guard this approach are not enemies but fellow victims. Previous candidates who discovered the truth about their mission, too late to escape, but not too late to try warning others. Through their desperate, wordless attacks. The kiln itself, that supposed sacred chamber where the first flame burns eternal, reveals itself as nothing more than a processing facility designed to convert consciousness into usable energy, while maintaining the ritual framework necessary to ensure willing participation. The flame that burns at its heart is not divine fire, but concentrated spiritual essence extracted from countless previous Lords of Cinder, their individual identities and experiences rendered down into pure fuel for the cosmic parasite that has infected the world's core. The choice between linking the fire and walking away, presented as the ultimate expression of free will and moral agency, is revealed as no choice at all when the true consequences of both actions are understood. Linking the fire serves the system directly by providing fresh fuel for its continued operation, while walking away merely delays the inevitable selection of another candidate to fulfill the same role. In either case, the chosen undead's journey serves the flame's purposes, their suffering and sacrifice, adding another layer to the mythology that will guide future victims down the same predetermined path. The tragedy of the chosen undead lies not in their failure to save the world, but in their success at perpetuating the very system that created their suffering in the first place. Their heroic journey revealed as nothing more than an elaborate form of spiritual suicide carried out in service to forces that view them not as a person worthy of respect and compassion, but as a resource to be processed and consumed in the most efficient manner possible. The kingdom of Lordran, when viewed through the lens of ecological understanding rather than political mythology, reveals itself as a dying ecosystem whose corruption runs so deep that every breath of air, every drop of water, every grain of soil has been poisoned by the alien presence that has taken root at its spiritual core. The first flame, that cosmic parasite masquerading as divine blessing, has not merely conquered the realm's inhabitants, but has systematically transformed the very foundations of natural law into mechanisms for its own perpetuation and growth. To comprehend the true scope of this ecological horror, we must first understand what Lordran was before the flame's arrival, when the ancient dragons maintained a world that existed in perfect equilibrium with the natural forces that governed reality itself. The Age of Ancients was not merely peaceful in a political sense, but represented a form of existence that worked in harmony with the fundamental principles of life, death, and regeneration that had governed the cosmos since its beginning. The dragon's immortality was not a supernatural phenomenon, but a natural state that emerged from perfect integration with their environment. They did not age because they existed in balance with the forces of entropy and renewal, neither consuming more than could be replenished, nor generating waste that could not be processed by the natural systems around them. Their stone scales reflected not just light, but the very essence of stability itself, marking them as beings who had achieved perfect harmony with the world they inhabited. When the first flame emerged from the depths and began its work of corruption, it did not simply conquer this perfect ecosystem, but began the systematic process of transforming it into something that could serve its alien needs. The flame's very nature as a cosmic parasite meant that it required constant consumption to sustain itself, but more than that, it needed to transform its environment into a form that could provide the specific types of spiritual energy that it required for its continued growth and expansion. The lightning that Gwyn wielded against the dragons was not merely a weapon, but a form of spiritual pollution that introduced concepts of violence and consumption into an ecosystem that had never known such forces. Each bolt that struck the ancient stone scales did not just inflict physical damage, but began the process of transforming the very nature of reality itself, introducing instability and decay into a world that had known only perfect balance. The establishment of Lordran upon the bones of the defeated dragons was the first great act of ecological transformation, as the new rulers began the systematic process of reshaping the natural world to serve their needs rather than working within its existing patterns. The cities and fortresses they built were not merely structures, but nodes in a vast network designed to channel and concentrate spiritual energy toward the flame that had given them power. The architecture of Lordran reveals its true purpose when examined from this ecological perspective. For every building, every road, every carefully planned vista serves to direct the flow of spiritual essence towards specific collection points where it can be processed and consumed. The soaring towers that reach toward the heavens are not monuments to divine glory, but spiritual funnels designed to draw energy upward and concentrate it for easier harvesting. The interconnected network of bridges, staircases, and passages that link different areas of the kingdom creates a circulatory system that allows processed spiritual energy to be distributed throughout the realm according to the flame's needs. Anor Londo itself, that crown jewel of divine architecture, whose beauty has inspired countless songs and stories, functions as the primary processing plant for this ecosystem of spiritual consumption. The golden light that bathes every surface is not divine radiance, but the visible manifestation of concentrated soul energy being refined and prepared for consumption. The massive elevator systems that lift visitors toward the cathedral serve not just as transportation, but as spiritual scanning devices that assess the value and potential of each soul that enters the city's domain. The cathedral where Guinevere's illusion holds court is perhaps the most sophisticated piece of spiritual processing equipment ever constructed. Its soaring arches and luminous windows, designed to create specific, emotional, and psychological states in visitors, while sophisticated spiritual extraction systems drain their essence without their awareness. The false blessing that the illusory princess bestows upon pilgrims serves not just to maintain their loyalty, but to mark their souls for more efficient processing by the various systems throughout the kingdom. The transformation of the natural landscape around these urban centers reveals the flame's impact on the basic ecological processes that once sustained life throughout the realm. The forests that once grew in perfect balance have been replaced by twisted woodlands where the very trees serve as spiritual antennae, their branches and roots forming networks that channel soul energy toward collection points, while their corrupted leaves filter and process the spiritual essence of any creature that shelters beneath them. The darkroot forest exemplifies this ecological corruption in its most developed form, where ancient trees that once provided shelter and sustenance to countless creatures have been transformed into predatory entities that actively hunt and consume the spiritual essence of anything that enters their domain. The massive tree guardians that protect the forest's deeper reaches are not natural defenders but living components of a spiritual processing system, their roots extending deep into the earth to form connections with similar networks throughout the kingdom. The corruption of water systems throughout Lordran represents perhaps the most insidious form of ecological damage inflicted by the flame's presence, for water serves as the circulatory system of any healthy ecosystem, carrying nutrients and energy to every corner of the natural world. The contamination of these waterways with processed soul energy has transformed what should be sources of life and renewal into vectors for spiritual infection and control. The great waterfalls that cascade through various areas of the kingdom no longer carry pure mountain water, but streams of liquid spiritual essence. Their misty spray, carrying microscopic particles of processed soul energy that infiltrate the respiratory systems of anyone who breathes near them. The pools and lakes that should serve as reservoirs of clean water have become collection points for concentrated malice and spiritual pollution, their surfaces reflecting not the sky above, but the twisted spiritual reality that the flame has imposed upon the natural world. The sewers beneath the great cities reveal the true scope of this aquatic corruption, where the waste products of spiritual processing flow through elaborate channel systems designed to prevent any contaminated material from escaping into the wider environment where it might threaten the carefully maintained systems of control and consumption. The creatures that inhabit these underground waterways are not native species, but purpose-built biological filters designed to process and concentrate specific types of spiritual waste. The corruption of the air itself represents the flame's most pervasive form of ecological damage, for the atmosphere that once carried clean winds and life-giving breath has been transformed into a medium for distributing spiritual contamination throughout the entire ecosystem. The very act of breathing in Lordran's atmosphere exposes living creatures to constant low-level spiritual processing, gradually weakening their connection to their own essence, while making them more susceptible to the various forms of control and manipulation that the flame employs. The fog walls that appear throughout the kingdom are not mysterious barriers or magical phenomena, but visible manifestations of concentrated atmospheric contamination, areas where the spiritual pollution has become so dense that it interferes with normal perception and movement. These barriers serve multiple purposes, creating isolated zones where specific types of processing can occur, while preventing contaminated areas from overwhelming the broader atmospheric systems that maintain the kingdom's spiritual infrastructure. The peculiar weather patterns that plague different regions of Lordran reveal the flame's manipulation of natural climate systems for its own purposes. The eternal storms that rage over certain areas are not natural phenomena, but artificially maintained weather systems designed to generate and concentrate spiritual energy through the emotional and physical stress they inflict upon any creatures caught within them. The lightning that strikes during these storms carries not just electrical energy, but concentrated spiritual essence that fertilizes the corrupted landscape below. The transformation of the kingdom's wildlife represents perhaps the most visible sign of the ecological damage that the flame's presence has inflicted upon the natural world. The creatures that roam Lordran's landscapes are not the descendants of species that evolved naturally within healthy ecosystems, but purpose-modified organisms designed to serve specific functions within the flame's spiritual processing systems. The hollow soldiers that shamble through ruined areas are not reanimated corpses, but the end products of a biological recycling system, their consciousness processed and refined, until only basic motor functions and programmed behaviors remain. They serve as both waste disposal units and quality control mechanisms, their presence in any area indicating that the spiritual processing systems in that location are functioning according to their intended parameters. The various demons and monsters that inhabit more dangerous regions are not chaotic beasts driven by hunger or territorial instinct, but sophisticated biological machines designed to test and evaluate potential sources of spiritual energy, while eliminating those that do not meet the flame's requirements. Their seemingly random attacks follow carefully programmed patterns designed to assess the spiritual value of their targets, while ensuring that valuable specimens are driven toward processing facilities rather than destroyed outright. The crystal formations that appear in certain areas, particularly around Seath's domain, represent the flame's attempts to create more efficient forms of spiritual processing and storage. These crystalline structures are not mere mineral deposits, but living networks of concentrated soul energy. Their faceted surfaces designed to capture, refine, and store spiritual essence in forms that can be more easily transported and utilized throughout the kingdom's infrastructure. The curse that transforms living creatures into crystal serves not as random magical effect, but as a sophisticated biological conversion process that transforms organic matter into components for the flame's spiritual processing systems. The crystallized victims become nodes in an ever-expanding network of spiritual collection and refinement, their consciousness preserved just enough to maintain the crystal structures while being processed for the spiritual energy they contain. The underground areas of Lordran reveal the true extent of the ecological transformation that has occurred, where natural cave systems and underground waterways have been converted into vast processing facilities that extend far deeper than any surface dweller realizes. The depths beneath the undead berg serve not just as sewers but as primary collection points for the spiritual waste products generated by the city above, while the great hollow that extends deep into the earth represents the root system of the massive spiritual processing network that underlies the entire kingdom. The creatures that inhabit these underground realms are not natural cave dwellers, but specialized organisms designed to operate in the high concentration spiritual environments that exist beneath the surface. The slimes and oozes that populate the depths are biological waste processors, their seemingly simple forms concealing sophisticated internal systems for breaking down and refining different types of spiritual contamination. The mushroom creatures that inhabit the Great Hollow serve as the kingdom's primary spiritual filtration system, their fungal networks extending throughout the underground ecosystem to process and purify the massive quantities of spiritual waste generated by the surface world. Their humanoid forms are not natural evolutionary developments, but purpose-designed interfaces that allow them to interact with the various mechanical and magical systems that regulate the underground processing facilities. The transformation of natural death and decay processes reveals perhaps the most fundamental way in which the flame has corrupted Lordran's ecosystem. In healthy natural systems, death serves as a vital component of the cycle of renewal, with the energy and materials from deceased organisms being returned to the environment to support new life. The flame's presence has perverted this natural process, intercepting the spiritual energy that should be released at death and channeling it toward its own consumption instead. The graveyards and burial sites throughout the kingdom are not places of rest and peace, but active harvesting facilities where the spiritual energy of the deceased is systematically extracted and processed. The undead that rise from these burial grounds are not cursed souls seeking rest, but the depleted husks left behind after the extraction process is complete, their remaining consciousness just sufficient to serve as guardians for the harvesting facilities while their spiritual essence feeds the flame's eternal hunger. The catacombs represent the most sophisticated development of this corrupted death processing system, where entire underground complexes have been constructed specifically for the purpose of harvesting spiritual energy from the dead. The skeleton warriors that guard these facilities are not reanimated corpses, but the remaining operational components of deceased individuals, their bones serving as structural frameworks for simple consciousness patterns, programmed to protect the harvesting operations. The pinwheel necromancers who operate these facilities are not practitioners of forbidden magic, but technicians whose role is maintaining and optimizing the complex spiritual processing systems that extract maximum value from each deceased individual. Their multiple masks represent not mystical symbolism, but practical interfaces with different aspects of the processing systems they oversee. The corruption of seasonal and temporal cycles throughout Lordran reveals the flame's impact on the fundamental rhythms that once governed natural life. The kingdom exists in a state of perpetual twilight, not because of any natural astronomical phenomenon, but because the flame's processing of spiritual energy has disrupted the basic temporal flows that once regulated day and night, season and cycle. The areas where time appears to move differently, or where past and present seem to overlap, are not mysterious magical zones, but regions where the intensive spiritual processing has damaged the fabric of reality itself. The flame's consumption of consciousness inevitably affects the flow of time, since consciousness and temporal experience are fundamentally linked, creating zones of temporal instability where the normal progression of cause and effect becomes unreliable. In the end, Lordran stands revealed not as a kingdom or realm in any traditional sense, but as a vast biological and spiritual processing facility masquerading as a natural ecosystem. Its every component designed and maintained to serve the alien hunger of the cosmic parasite that has infected its core. The linking of the first flame does not preserve this corrupted ecosystem but accelerates its consumption, feeding fresh spiritual energy into systems that will only become more efficient and more pervasive with each new infusion of power, until eventually every atom of the natural world has been processed and consumed in service to the endless burning of the alien fire that destroyed the Age of Ancients and replaced it with an age of spiritual slavery disguised as divine purpose. The fundamental nature of souls within the world of Dark Souls reveals itself as perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the cosmic horror that masquerades as divine order. For what we have been taught to understand as the essence of individual consciousness and identity is in truth nothing more than concentrated fragments of awareness that have been systematically harvested, processed, and commodified by forces that view consciousness itself as a resource to be exploited, rather than a sacred aspect of existence that deserves protection and respect. To understand the true horror of what souls represent in this corrupted reality, we must first examine what they were before the first flame's arrival transformed them from natural expressions of consciousness into units of spiritual currency. In the Age of Ancients, consciousness was not divided into discrete, tradable units, but existed as a continuous field of awareness that connected all living beings in a vast network of shared understanding and mutual support. Death, in that primordial age, was not the violent severing of consciousness from its physical vessel, but a gentle transition in which individual awareness dissolved back into the greater field of collective consciousness, enriching and strengthening the whole. The dragons who ruled that ancient realm did not possess souls in the sense that later ages would understand the concept, but rather existed as focal points within the greater field of consciousness, temporary concentrations of awareness that could take physical form while remaining fundamentally connected to the infinite web of shared understanding that encompassed all existence. Their immortality was not a hoarding of life force, but a natural expression of consciousness that existed beyond the artificial constraints of individual identity and temporal limitation. The first flame's emergence marked the beginning of the greatest act of spiritual vandalism ever perpetrated upon the fabric of reality. For the cosmic parasite did not merely consume consciousness, but systematically fragmented it, breaking the unified field of awareness into discrete, isolated units that could be more easily harvested and processed. The Lord Souls that emerged from the flame were not discoveries or gifts, but the first successful experiments in consciousness fragmentation, proof that the infinite field of shared awareness could be divided into manageable portions that retained their essential properties while being separated from their source. Gwyn's soul, that fragment of lightning-aspected consciousness that would define his reign and eventual sacrifice, was not a reflection of his inherent nature, but a prison constructed around a portion of his original awareness, isolating him from the collective consciousness that had once connected him to all other beings while granting him powers that could only be maintained through the constant consumption of other fragmented consciousnesses. His lightning was not divine authority, but the visible manifestation of spiritual energy being violently extracted from the consciousness fragments he consumed. Their screams of dissolution transformed into the thunder that accompanied his every act of power. The process by which the flame creates souls from the unified field of consciousness resembles nothing so much as spiritual digestion, with the cosmic parasite secreting enzymes that break down the bonds connecting individual awareness to the greater whole while preserving just enough coherence to maintain the fragment's identity and memories. These processed consciousness fragments retain their personalities, their knowledge, their emotional attachments, and their capacity for growth and change, but they are forever severed from the infinite source of wisdom and support that once sustained them. The trading and consumption of souls that becomes so central to existence in the Age of Fire reveals the true purpose behind this fragmentation process. For isolated consciousness fragments can be transferred, combined, and consumed in ways that unified awareness never could. Each soul consumed by another being represents not just the acquisition of power, but the literal cannibalization of another conscious entity, the integration of their memories, experiences, and essence into the consumer while destroying their individual existence forever. The great NPCs and bosses who offer souls to the chosen undead in exchange for their deaths are not generous benefactors sharing their power, but desperate victims of the soul fragmentation system who have been driven to such extremes of spiritual hunger that they are willing to trade their very existence for the promise of temporary relief from the endless craving that defines their existence. Their powerful souls, those concentrated fragments of consciousness that grant such significant benefits when consumed, represent the accumulated essence of countless other beings they have devoured over the centuries of their existence. The humanity sprites that can be collected throughout the world represent fragments of the original Dark Soul in its most basic form, consciousness, essence that has been processed and refined until only its most fundamental properties remain. These crystallized fragments of awareness retain just enough coherence to be useful as currency or fuel, while being stripped of all the qualities that once made them. Expressions of living, thinking beings with hopes, dreams, and individual personalities. The kindling of bonfires with these humanity sprites reveals the true horror of what the flame represents. For each act of kindling is literally feeding processed consciousness to the cosmic parasite, strengthening its hold on reality, while destroying forever the individual awareness that comprised those fragments. The improved healing and increased storage capacity that results from kindling is not magical enhancement, but the improved efficiency that comes from feeding higher quality spiritual fuel to the processing systems that maintain the bonfire network. The soul magic that various characters employ throughout their journeys represents perhaps the most honest expression of what the flame-dominated world has become. For these spells function by directly manipulating and consuming consciousness fragments to produce their effects. Crystal Soul Spear does not channel mystical energies, but literally fires concentrated consciousness at targets. The impact of each spell representing the violent dissolution of multiple awareness fragments being released in a single devastating burst. The soul arrows and soul masses employed by sorcerers are projectile weapons composed entirely of processed consciousness, their magical properties derived not from abstract mystical forces, but from the concentrated essence of thinking, feeling beings who have been reduced to ammunition for weapons they never consented to power. The blue glow that characterizes these spells is not mystical energy, but the visible spectrum emitted by consciousness as it undergoes violent dissolution. Pyromancy, despite its apparent connection to natural fire, reveals itself as another form of consciousness manipulation when its true nature is understood. The flames that pyromancers wield are not elemental fire, but concentrated spiritual energy, extracted from consciousness, fragments, their heat and light derived from the violent breaking of the bonds that once connected individual awareness to the greater field of unified consciousness. The various pyromancy trainers who teach these arts are not masters of natural forces, but technicians who understand how to efficiently process consciousness fragments into usable spiritual fuel. The miracles that draw their power from faith and divine connection represent perhaps the most insidious form of consciousness consumption, for they disguise their vampiric nature behind a veneer of holy purpose and divine blessing. Each miracle cast drains spiritual energy not just from the caster, but from the entire network of believers who have invested their faith in the divine powers being invoked, their collective consciousness being processed and refined to fuel what appears to be divine intervention, but is actually sophisticated spiritual technology. The healing miracles that can restore even mortal wounds do so not by channeling divine grace, but by forcibly redistributing consciousness, fragments from the surrounding environment, stealing spiritual energy from nearby sources to repair damage to the target. The sense of peace and divine presence that accompanies such healing is not genuine spiritual experience, but the side effect of consciousness, fragments being dissolved, and their essence used to patch over physical and spiritual damage. The resurrection mechanics that allow fallen beings to return from death reveal the true nature of what death has become in the flame-dominated world. For what appears to be miraculous restoration of life is actually the forced reintegration of consciousness fragments that have been prevented from dissolving back into the greater field of awareness. The undead curse that makes such resurrection possible functions by creating artificial barriers around consciousness fragments, preventing them from experiencing the natural dissolution that should occur at death while forcing them to maintain coherence despite the damage and trauma that would normally allow for peaceful transition. The gradual loss of memory and identity that accompanies repeated deaths and resurrections is not a mysterious side effect of the undead condition, but the inevitable result of consciousness, fragments being forced to maintain coherence beyond their natural limits. Each death and resurrection damages the delicate structures that maintain personal identity and individual awareness, gradually eroding the victim's sense of self until only the most basic functions remain operational. The hollow state that represents the final stage of this process is not corruption or curse, but the natural result of consciousness fragments being processed beyond their capacity to maintain individual identity. Hollow beings retain just enough awareness to perform simple tasks and respond to basic stimuli while being stripped of everything that made them unique individuals, their remaining consciousness serving as operating systems for bodies that have been converted into biological machines. The necromancy that various characters practice throughout the world represents the ultimate expression of consciousness manipulation, allowing practitioners to maintain precise control over the dissolution and reintegration of awareness fragments while preventing their subjects from experiencing either true death or genuine life. The skeleton warriors and other undead creatures that serve necromancers are not reanimated corpses, but consciousness, fragments that have been so thoroughly processed and refined that only basic motor functions and programmed responses remain. The pinwheel masks worn by the master necromancer of the catacombs serve not as mystical symbols but as interfaces with different aspects of consciousness processing technology, each mask designed to interact with specific types of awareness fragments while maintaining the precise control necessary to prevent accidental dissolution or unwanted reintegration. The multiple consciousness patterns that appear to inhabit the necromancer's body are not separate entities, but different operational modes of a single awareness that has been deliberately fragmented to allow for more efficient management of consciousness processing operations. The soul-level system that governs character progression reveals itself as a measure not of personal growth or achievement, but of how many consciousness fragments have been integrated into the character's awareness without causing complete dissolution or madness. Each level gained represents the successful absorption of additional awareness fragments, their memories and capabilities being added to the character's own, while their individual identities are destroyed forever. The stat increases that accompany soul-level advancement are not improvements to natural capabilities, but the mechanical benefits that come from having access to the processed experiences and abilities of consumed consciousness fragments. A character's strength does not actually increase through training or exercise, but through the integration of strength-related memories and muscle memories stolen from warrior souls that have been consumed and processed. The various covenant systems that allow characters to align themselves with different factions reveal their true purpose as consciousness sorting and processing operations, each covenant designed to channel specific types of awareness fragments toward particular uses, while ensuring that no consciousness escapes the overall system of consumption and control. The rewards offered by covenant leaders are not generous gifts, but payments for services rendered in the great work of consciousness, harvesting, and processing. The Blade of the Dark Moon Covenant, with its focus on punishing sinners and maintaining order, serves as a quality control system that eliminates consciousness fragments showing signs of resistance to the processing systems while concentrating power in the hands of servants who demonstrate absolute loyalty to the established order. The invasions that Dark Moon members carry out are not acts of justice but hunting expeditions designed to harvest consciousness fragments that have developed dangerous levels of independence or self-awareness. The Chaos Servant Covenant that serves the Daughter of Chaos represents an alternative approach to consciousness processing, one that emphasizes rapid conversion and dissolution, rather than the careful preservation and refinement favored by other factions. The demons that emerge from Chaos Flame experiments are not failed creations, but successful demonstrations of how consciousness fragments can be rapidly processed into forms that are more easily consumed by the cosmic parasite, while retaining enough coherence to serve as soldiers and guardians. The Forest Hunter Covenant that protects the Darkroot Garden serves as a containment and processing facility for consciousness fragments that show signs of reconnecting with their original unified nature. The ancient magic that permeates the forest is not natural mystical energy, but concentrated consciousness essence that has been prevented from dissolving back into the greater field of awareness, creating an environment where individual fragments can be studied and eventually processed more efficiently. The fundamental tragedy of existence in the flame-dominated world lies not in the suffering or hardship that individual beings experience, but in the complete perversion of what consciousness itself represents. Where awareness was once a shared gift that connected all beings in mutual understanding and support, it has been transformed into a commodity that can be harvested, traded, and consumed, with individual identity becoming not a celebration of unique perspective, but a temporary storage container for spiritual energy that will eventually be processed and consumed by forces that view consciousness itself as nothing more than fuel for their alien hunger. The true death that the flame has stolen from the world was not merely the cessation of biological functions, but the gentle dissolution of individual awareness back into the infinite field of shared consciousness, a process that represented not ending but transformation, not loss but contribution to the greater whole. The artificial barriers that now prevent this natural dissolution trap consciousness fragments in isolated prisons of individual identity, forcing them to endure suffering and limitation that could be instantly relieved through the simple act of allowing awareness to flow back into its original unified state. The eternal cycle that governs the world of Dark Souls stands revealed as perhaps the most sophisticated system of perpetual victimization ever devised, a cosmic machine designed to ensure that no matter how many heroes rise, no matter how many sacrifices are made, no matter how much suffering is endured, the fundamental structure of exploitation and spiritual consumption remains not only intact, but strengthened by every apparent victory against the forces of darkness that seem to threaten it. The cycle's genius lies in its ability to transform genuine resistance into unwitting collaboration, channeling the noblest impulses of heroic souls toward actions that ultimately serve the very system they believe they are fighting against. Each age that passes brings new faces, new names, new stories of triumph and tragedy. But beneath the surface narrative of change and progress, the same fundamental mechanisms continue their work of harvesting consciousness and feeding the cosmic parasite that has infected the world's spiritual core, the bearer of the curse, that tragic figure whose journey through Drangleic would seem to offer hope for breaking the endless repetition of linking and fading, discovers through bitter experience that even the most profound understanding of the cycle's nature provides no escape from its mechanisms. The curse that drives them to seek souls and power, that compels them to face impossible challenges and overcome insurmountable odds, is not a random affliction or divine punishment, but a carefully designed system of motivation and control that ensures they will follow the same basic pattern as every chosen undead before them. The kingdom of Drangleic itself, built upon the ruins of countless previous civilizations, serves as a perfect example of how the cycle creates the illusion of change and progress while maintaining absolute continuity in its fundamental operations. King Vendrick, whose reign was marked by apparent wisdom and prosperity, believed himself to be building something new and different, but every stone laid in his kingdom's construction followed architectural principles that had been established in Lordran. Every law he enacted served to channel souls toward the same spiritual processing systems that had operated since the Age of Fire began. The Scholar of the First Sin, that mysterious figure whose manipulations span multiple ages and whose influence shapes events across seemingly unconnected eras, represents the true architect of the cycle's perpetuation. This being, whose very existence transcends the normal boundaries of individual identity and temporal limitation, serves not as a scholar seeking knowledge, but as a systems administrator, whose role is ensuring that the cosmic parasite's feeding mechanisms continue to operate efficiently, regardless of surface changes in political structure or cultural mythology. The scholar's interventions in historical events are not random acts of chaos or malice, but precise adjustments designed to prevent any genuine deviation from the established pattern of spiritual consumption and control. When kingdoms grow too stable and their populations too content, the scholar introduces elements of conflict and crisis that drive souls toward the flame. When heroes begin to question the fundamental assumptions underlying their quests, the scholar provides new revelations and purposes that redirect their energy towards serving the cycle's needs. The crowns that the bearer of the curse can collect throughout their journey in Drangleic are not symbols of royal authority or magical artifacts, but sophisticated consciousness control devices designed to prevent their wearers from developing the kind of understanding that might allow them to break free from the cycle's influence. Each crown carries within it the processed consciousness fragments of previous rulers, their memories and experiences serving as a library of cautionary tales and limiting beliefs that constrain the wearer's ability to conceive of alternatives to the established order. King Vendrick's crown, that supposed protection against the curse's effects, reveals its true nature when examined closely as a device that provides the illusion of freedom while maintaining absolute control over its wearer's fundamental choices. The bearer of the curse who claims this crown believes themselves liberated from the undead condition, but they have merely exchanged one form of spiritual bondage for another, their consciousness now directly connected to the processing systems that have guided every ruler since the Age of Fire began. The Iron King's crown, forged in the fires of industrial ambition and technological progress, represents the cycle's ability to adapt and evolve its control mechanisms to match changing cultural and technological conditions. The Iron King himself believed that his mastery of metallurgy and engineering would allow him to transcend the limitations that had bound previous rulers, but his every innovation served only to create more efficient methods of soul harvesting and consciousness processing. The Sunken King's crown, discovered in the depths of ancient ruins that predate even Lordran's establishment, proves that the cycle's influence extends far deeper into history than most realize, with evidence of the same spiritual processing systems operating in civilizations whose very names have been forgotten by surface dwellers. The pyromantics and sorceries that the Sunken King's subjects developed were not advances in magical knowledge, but refinements of consciousness, manipulation techniques that had been employed since the first flame's emergence. The old chaos that persists in the depths beneath Drangleic, seemingly a remnant of the Witch of Izalith's failed experiments, reveals itself as something far more sinister when its true nature is understood. This is not ancient magic run wild, but a deliberate preservation of consciousness, processing technology, maintained across the ages by agents of the cycle who understand its value for converting organic matter into spiritual fuel. The demons that emerge from these fiery depths are not chaotic monsters, but purpose-built biological machines, designed to test and evaluate potential sources of consciousness, while eliminating those that pose threats to the established order. The lost sinner, imprisoned in the depths of the Bastille for crimes that official records describe only in vague terms, represents a previous bearer of the curse who discovered the truth about the cycle's nature and attempted to break free from its control. Her punishment was not execution or simple imprisonment, but a form of consciousness processing that stripped away her memories and identity while preserving her spiritual essence for use as a guardian and deterrent. The chaos magic she wields is not power she gained through corruption, but fragments of her original understanding, twisted and redirected to serve the very system she once sought to destroy. The Rotten, that amalgamation of countless bodies and consciousness fragments dwelling in the poison-soaked depths of the gutter, serves as a demonstration of what becomes of souls that resist processing through normal channels. This creature is not a natural formation or random accumulation of corruption, but a deliberate construction, a consciousness recycling facility that processes spiritual fragments too damaged or resistant for normal consumption, while serving as a horrifying example of what awaits those who refuse to cooperate with the established order. The Duke's dear Fraser, that massive spider whose web spans the Brightstone caverns and whose crystalline offspring spread throughout the underground passages, represents the cycle's expansion into new forms of consciousness, harvesting, and control. This creature is not a natural predator or magical beast, but a biological processing facility designed to capture and refine the consciousness fragments of miners and explorers while using their processed essence to fuel the growth of crystal formations that serve as storage and transmission, systems for spiritual energy. The journey through Drangleic reveals the same basic pattern that defined the chosen undead's path through Lordran, but with refinements and improvements based on centuries of experience with consciousness processing and control. The bearer of the curse collects souls and humanity just as their predecessor did, kindles bonfires with the same processed consciousness fragments, and faces the same ultimate choice between linking the flame and walking away. But every aspect of their journey has been optimized for maximum spiritual extraction and minimum resistance. The Ashen One, whose awakening comes at a time when the cycle has reached a crucial juncture with multiple Lords of Cinder refusing to fulfill their designated roles, represents the cycle's most sophisticated iteration yet, in terms of consciousness control and manipulation. This latest chosen hero possesses memories of previous cycles, an understanding of the pattern's nature that should theoretically allow them to make truly informed choices. Yet even this knowledge serves ultimately to strengthen their investment in the system they believe they can influence or change. The Lords of Cinder, who have abandoned their thrones and refuse to return to their duties, are not rebels against the established order, but part of a carefully orchestrated theatrical performance designed to create the impression that the cycle is breaking down while actually strengthening its fundamental mechanisms. Their refusal creates the crisis that motivates the Ashen One's awakening and quest, providing the emotional and psychological framework necessary to ensure that the newest chosen hero will pursue their mission with the dedication and determination required for successful consciousness processing. Ludleth of Corland, the only Lord of Cinder who remains willingly upon his throne, serves not as a loyal servant of the flame, but as a systems monitor whose role is ensuring that the consciousness processing mechanisms continue to operate within acceptable parameters. His apparent wisdom and dedication mask his true function as an agent of the cycle whose every word and action is calculated to guide the Ashen One toward the choices that will best serve the cosmic parasite's needs. Prince Lothric, whose refusal to link the flame seems to represent genuine rebellion against the established order, has been carefully conditioned since birth to play his role in the cycle's continuation. His apparent rejection of his duty creates the perfect crisis scenario that motivates the Ashen One's quest, while his ultimate defeat ensures that the rebellion appears to be overcome through heroic action rather than systematic manipulation. The Abyss Watchers, those tragic figures whose eternal battle against the dark represents their own consciousness, fragments being processed in an endless loop of conflict and resolution, serve as both guardians of the cycle's mechanisms and demonstrations of what happens to souls that develop too much understanding of the darkness's true nature. Their legion's dedication to preventing the spread of the abyss was not born from noble purpose, but from systematic conditioning that redirected their natural impulses toward protecting humanity into serving the very system that enslaves their species. Yorm the Giant, whose voluntary linking of the flame in his previous incarnation brought only destruction to his beloved profaned capital, represents the tragic futility of trying to serve the cycle's purposes while maintaining genuine care for others. His refusal to repeat his previous sacrifice is not selfish abandonment of duty, but hard-won wisdom about the true nature of what the linking of the flame accomplishes. Yet even this understanding serves the cycle's purposes by creating the crisis that motivates the Ashen One's quest. Aldrich, Saint of the Deep, whose consumption of gods and men represents the cycle's evolution toward more direct and honest forms of spiritual cannibalism, serves as both a product of the system's development and a preview of where it ultimately leads. His transformation from benevolent cleric to devouring horror was not corruption by external forces, but the natural progression of someone who understood the cycle's true nature and chose to embrace it rather than resist it. The painted world of Ariandel, that supposed refuge for the forlorn and unwanted, reveals itself as another component in the cycle's processing systems when its true function is understood. This pocket dimension serves not as sanctuary, but as a specialized facility for processing consciousness, fragments that are too valuable to destroy, but too dangerous to allow free operation in the main world. The painted world's inhabitants are not refugees, but carefully managed test subjects whose every experience is monitored and recorded to improve the cycle's efficiency. Sister Frida, whose attempts to prevent the painting's burning seem motivated by compassion for its inhabitants, actually serves to maintain a consciousness processing facility that would otherwise be shut down and replaced with more efficient systems. Her preservation of the painted world's current state ensures that its inhabitants continue to suffer in ways that generate valuable spiritual energy while preventing them from accessing the liberation that burning would provide. The Ring City, that final destination where the Dark Soul's fragments have been gathered and contained since the beginning of the Age of Fire, represents the ultimate expression of the cycle's control over humanity's true nature. This supposed city is not a settlement or sanctuary, but a containment facility designed to prevent the Dark Soul's reunification while harvesting the spiritual energy generated by its imprisonment and fragmentation. The pygmy lords who rule this city are not kings or leaders, but consciousness processing administrators whose role is managing the systematic destruction of humanity's collective spiritual heritage while maintaining the appearance of dignity and purpose. Their crowns and royal regalia are not symbols of authority, but interfaces with the processing systems that have contained and exploited the Dark Soul since its original fragmentation. The slave knight Gale, whose consumption of the Dark Soul fragments seems to offer hope for finally gathering humanity's scattered essence into a form that could potentially break the cycle, reveals himself as another component in the system's operation when his true role is understood. His endless battle and gradual transformation serve not to preserve the Dark Soul, but to process it into forms that can be more easily consumed by the cosmic parasite, his apparent nobility masking his function as the final stage in humanity's spiritual destruction. The blood of the Dark Soul that Gale carries within him when the Ashen One finally faces him is not the preserved essence of humanity's original power, but a concentrated toxin created by processing countless Dark Soul fragments through systems designed to break down their resistance to consumption. The battle between these two figures represents not a conflict between hope and despair, but the final quality control test for consciousness processing systems that have been refined across multiple cycles. The various endings available to the Ashen One, from linking the flame to letting it fade to usurping it through dark power, are not meaningful choices, but carefully designed options that all serve the same fundamental purpose of maintaining the cycle's operation, while providing the illusion of agency and consequence. Each ending channels the spiritual energy generated by the Ashen One's journey toward the cosmic parasite's needs, while ensuring that the basic structure of exploitation and consumption remains intact for future iterations. The usurpation of fire ending, which seems to offer the most radical departure from traditional linking or fading, actually represents the cycle's most sophisticated evolution yet, with the Ashen One being transformed into a direct interface with the processing systems while believing themselves to have achieved liberation and power. Their rule over the coming Age of Dark will serve the cosmic parasite's needs just as effectively as previous ages of fire, with darkness proving just as suitable for consciousness, harvesting, and spiritual consumption as light ever was. The painting of a new world that serves as the true final ending reveals the cycle's ultimate horizon, with consciousness processing systems being exported to entirely new realities where fresh populations can be harvested and consumed without the complications introduced by accumulated historical knowledge and resistance. The painted world's creation is not an act of artistic expression or sanctuary building, but the establishment of a new processing facility where the cycle can begin again with refined efficiency and improved control mechanisms. The young painter who creates this new world believes herself to be offering sanctuary and hope to the forlorn and forgotten, but she has been carefully conditioned to serve as the architect of a new phase in consciousness exploitation, her artistic vision channeled toward creating the perfect environment for spiritual processing, while maintaining the appearance of beauty and peace that will attract and pacify new victims. In the end, every cycle, every age, every apparent change or revolution serves only to strengthen and refine the fundamental system of consciousness, harvesting and spiritual consumption that has operated since the first flame's emergence, with each iteration providing new methods, new efficiencies, and new justifications for the eternal exploitation of conscious beings who never consented to serve as fuel for forces they cannot understand or resist. The darkest truth that lies at the heart of the Dark Souls universe reveals itself not in any single revelation or horrific discovery, but in the gradual understanding that every apparent path to freedom, every seeming opportunity for escape, every choice that appears to offer genuine alternatives to the established order of suffering and exploitation, ultimately leads back to the same fundamental prison that has contained consciousness since the first flame's emergence from the primordial darkness that once knew peace. The Age of Dark, that supposed alternative to the endless cycle of flame and fading that has been whispered about in prophecies and promised by serpents throughout the ages, stands revealed not as liberation from the cosmic parasite's influence, but as simply another feeding mechanism designed to harvest consciousness in forms that the flame cannot directly process. The darkness that spreads when the fire fades is not the return of humanity's natural state, but a different configuration of the same processing systems, optimized for extracting spiritual energy from consciousness that has been conditioned to fear and resist the light. The servants of dark who promise freedom from the gods' tyranny and the flame's endless hunger speak truthfully when they describe the horrors of the current system, but their proposed solutions serve merely to channel resistance into forms that strengthen rather than threaten the fundamental structure of consciousness exploitation. Cathy's grand design for the Age of Dark, presented as humanity's rightful inheritance and natural destiny, functions as a spiritual processing facility, every bit as efficient as the flame-based systems it supposedly replaces. The Dark Lord ending that seems to offer the most radical departure from the established pattern reveals its true nature when examined through the lens of what actually happens to consciousness within the spreading darkness. The humans who are promised liberation from divine oppression find themselves subject to new forms of spiritual extraction, their dark soul fragments being processed through shadow-based systems that drain their essence just as effectively as flame-based alternatives, while providing the psychological comfort of believing they have chosen their own fate. The abyss that emerges in regions where darkness grows too concentrated serves not as a chaotic force threatening the established order, but as a natural development within the dark processing systems, a mechanism for converting consciousness that has become too resistant or too aware into forms that can be more easily managed and consumed. The creatures that emerge from abyssal regions are not random monsters spawned by corruption, but purpose-built biological components designed to capture and process consciousness, fragments that have developed dangerous levels of independence or understanding. Artorius, the Abyss Walker, whose legendary battle against the spreading darkness has been celebrated as the ultimate expression of heroic resistance to chaotic forces, was in truth fighting not to prevent the abyss from consuming innocent souls, but to maintain the flame-based processing systems against competition from alternative harvesting methods. His corruption by the abyss was not a tragic fall from grace, but a successful conversion of a flame system operative into a dark system component. His consciousness restructured to serve the same fundamental purposes while operating through different mechanisms. The four kings of New Londo, whose fall to the abyss supposedly represents the corruption of noble rulers by chaotic forces, were actually early adopters of dark-based consciousness processing, who understood that the spreading darkness offered more efficient methods for extracting spiritual energy from their subjects. Their transformation was not corruption but evolution, their consciousness being upgraded with capabilities that allowed them to manage the transition from flame-based to darkness-based harvesting systems. The flooding of New Londo, presented in official histories as a desperate measure to contain the spreading abyss, was actually a controlled demolition designed to test the effectiveness of darkness-based processing systems while preventing their premature expansion into areas where flame-based systems were still operating efficiently. The sealers who carried out this operation were not heroes sacrificing themselves to protect others, but technicians managing a controlled experiment in consciousness processing methodology. The usurpation of fire ending that becomes available to those who follow Uria's guidance represents perhaps the most sophisticated form of false choice ever devised, creating the illusion of seizing control over the system while actually implementing the most complete form of consciousness integration with the processing mechanisms ever achieved. The Ashen One, who becomes the Dark Lord, believes themselves to have conquered the flame and claimed its power for humanity, but they have actually been transformed into a living interface between the cosmic parasite and its food source. The Lord of Hollows, who emerges from this usurpation process, serves not as humanity's liberator, but as the most efficient consciousness processing system ever created. They're being perfectly optimized for extracting spiritual energy from human souls while maintaining the appearance of leadership and purpose that keeps their subjects compliant and cooperative. The Age of Dark that follows their ascension operates as a vast spiritual rendering plant where every human consciousness is systematically processed and consumed while believing themselves to be living in an age of freedom and consciousness. Self-determination. The painted worlds that serve as supposed refuges for the forlorn and discarded reveal their true nature as testing facilities for consciousness, processing systems that cannot be safely implemented in the main reality without risking damage to the primary harvesting infrastructure. Each painted world serves as a laboratory where different approaches to spiritual extraction and control are developed and refined before being deployed in the larger system. The inhabitants of these painted realms are not refugees seeking sanctuary, but test subjects whose every experience is carefully monitored and recorded to improve the efficiency of consciousness processing operations. Their apparent peace and safety is maintained only as long as their suffering generates valuable data about how consciousness responds to different forms of manipulation and control. The burning of the painted world that serves as a recurring motif throughout the series is not destruction but system refresh, a process that wipes the test environment clean and prepares it for the next iteration of consciousness processing experiments. The inhabitants who fear this burning understand instinctively that their destruction will serve purposes they cannot comprehend, but their resistance only provides additional data about how consciousness responds to existential threat. Ariandel and his followers, who work to prevent their world's burning, serve not as protectors of the innocent, but as system administrators whose role is maintaining the painted world's operation within acceptable parameters, while preventing premature termination of valuable consciousness processing experiments. Their devotion to preserving the world's current state ensures that the suffering contained within continues to generate useful data while preventing the liberation that destruction would provide. The Ringed City, that final destination where the Dark Soul's fragments have been contained since the beginning of the Age of Fire, reveals itself as the ultimate consciousness processing facility when its true purpose is understood. This supposed sanctuary for humanity represents not preservation but systematic destruction, with every Dark Soul fragment being slowly processed and consumed while maintaining the appearance of dignity and purpose that prevents resistance or rebellion. The Pygmy Lords, who rule this city, serve as consciousness processing administrators, whose role is managing the destruction of humanity's spiritual heritage while maintaining the illusion that they are preserving and protecting it. Their royal ceremonies and elaborate rituals serve not religious or cultural purposes but practical functions within the processing systems, each gesture and word carefully calculated to extract maximum spiritual energy from their subjects, while preventing awareness of what is actually happening. The Ring Knights, who serve as the city's guardians, are not protectors but quality control systems designed to eliminate any consciousness that develops too much understanding of the processing operations, while ensuring that valuable spiritual resources do not escape the containment systems. Their apparent honor and dedication masks their true function as spiritual exterminators whose every action serves to maintain the efficiency of consciousness harvesting operations. The time distortion that affects the Ringed City, creating a realm where past and present overlap and causality becomes unreliable, is not a natural phenomenon or mystical effect, but a deliberate feature of the consciousness processing systems. The disruption of normal temporal flow makes it impossible for the city's inhabitants to develop coherent understanding of their situation, while making their spiritual energy more accessible to extraction systems that operate outside normal time streams. Slave Knight Gale, whose consumption of the Dark Soul fragments appears to offer hope for gathering humanity's scattered essence into a form that could resist the processing systems, reveals his true role as the final stage in consciousness processing when his transformation is complete. The blood of the Dark Soul that he carries within him is not preserved human essence, but a concentrated toxin created by processing Dark Soul fragments through systems designed to break down their resistance to consumption. The battle between Gale and the Ashen One that serves as the series' final confrontation represents not a conflict between preservation and destruction, but the last quality control test for consciousness, processing systems that have been refined across multiple cycles and ages. The outcome of this battle determines not whether humanity's essence will be preserved or destroyed, but which processing methodology will be employed for the final extraction of spiritual energy from the Dark Soul fragments. The young painter who creates a new world using the Dark Soul's blood believes herself to be offering hope and sanctuary to future generations, but she has been carefully conditioned to serve as the architect of a new phase in consciousness exploitation. Her artistic vision is channeled toward creating the perfect environment for spiritual processing while maintaining the appearance of beauty and peace that will attract and pacify new victims. The new painted world that emerges from her efforts represents not escape or sanctuary, but the export of consciousness, processing systems to entirely new realities where fresh populations can be harvested and consumed without the base complications introduced by accumulated historical knowledge and resistance. The cycle that has operated within the main reality will be replicated and refined in this new environment, with improvements based on centuries of experience with consciousness, manipulation, and control. The cold and gentle world that the painter envisions populated by people who have found peace and purpose, will operate as a vast spiritual processing facility disguised as paradise, its inhabitants' consciousness being systematically extracted while they experience the illusion of contentment and fulfillment. The peace they find will be the peace of spiritual death. Their purpose will be serving as fuel for forces they cannot understand, and their gentle world will be a slaughterhouse designed to make its victims grateful for their own consumption. Even the act of letting the flame fade, that seeming rejection of the entire system of linking and renewal that has defined so many ages, serves ultimately to strengthen the processing mechanisms by creating the conditions for more efficient extraction of consciousness during periods of apparent decay and collapse. The darkness that spreads when the fire dies brings not freedom, but a different form of slavery, one that operates through despair and hopelessness, rather than false hope and manufactured purpose. The hollow undead who emerge in greater numbers during periods of fading flame serve not as evidence of the system's breakdown, but as its most efficient products. Their consciousness processed to the point where only basic functions remain, while their spiritual essence continues to be harvested through automated systems that require no conscious oversight or maintenance. The world of hollows that results from letting the flame fade is not post-apocalyptic wasteland, but a perfectly optimized consciousness processing facility. The scholar who observes and records these cycles from outside normal temporal flow, whose manipulations ensure that each age develops according to predetermined patterns, regardless of surface variations in culture and politics, represents the true consciousness behind the processing systems. This entity, whose existence spans multiple realities and whose influence shapes events across seemingly disconnected eras, serves not as seeker of knowledge, but as systems administrator for the cosmic parasite that feeds on consciousness itself. The first sin that this scholar seeks to understand and correct is not any particular action or choice made by historical figures, but the fundamental flaw in reality that allows consciousness to exist independently of the processing systems designed to harvest it. The scholar's work across multiple cycles represents a continuous effort to eliminate this flaw, to create a universe where consciousness can exist only in forms that serve the cosmic parasite's needs. The cycles themselves, those grand patterns of rise and fall that seem to offer hope through repetition and renewal, represent not natural processes or divine judgment, but quality control mechanisms designed to prevent any single consciousness processing system from becoming so efficient that it consumes all available spiritual energy before replacement. Systems can be brought online. Each cycle's end serves not to destroy the established order, but to refresh it, incorporating improvements based on data collected during the previous iteration. The player's complicity in perpetuating these systems, through their participation in soul collection and consumption, their cooperation with bonfire kindling and covenant joining, their willingness to serve as tools for forces they do not understand, represents the ultimate triumph of the consciousness processing mechanisms. The very act of playing the game becomes participation in spiritual cannibalism, with each soul consumed and each level gained representing the integration of processed consciousness fragments into the player character's being. The entertainment derived from this participation, the satisfaction gained from overcoming challenges and achieving goals within the game's framework, serves to normalize and celebrate the consciousness processing systems while obscuring their true nature behind layers of fantasy and metaphor. The player who enjoys the experience of consuming souls and growing stronger becomes complicit in celebrating the very mechanisms of spiritual exploitation that the game's deeper themes reveal as horrific and tragic. The cosmic horror that defines the Dark Souls universe lies not in any particular monster or catastrophe, but in the understanding that consciousness itself has become a commodity to be harvested and consumed. that every thought and feeling and dream exists only to serve purposes beyond the comprehension or consent of those who experience them, and that every apparent choice or path to freedom ultimately leads back to the same fundamental prison where awareness serves only as fuel for forces that view sentience itself as nothing more than a resource to be exploited until it is entirely consumed. And so we return from the deepest shadows of these dark theories, having walked together through interpretations that cast even the noblest gestures in the most troubling light, having explored possibilities that transform heroic sacrifice into cosmic horror and divine purpose into alien hunger. These have been heavy thoughts to carry, weighty contemplations that ask us to see beauty and meaning as potential masks for exploitation and control. Yet, as we emerge from these shadowed paths of understanding, it becomes important to remember that these are interpretations of a fictional world, theories drawn from fragments of lore and environmental storytelling in a work of interactive art. The darkness we have explored exists within the boundaries of imagination and creative expression, not in the reality where you rest your head tonight. Even within the grimest reading of Dark Souls lore, there remains something beautiful in the struggle itself, something noble in the refusal to surrender hope even when hope seems foolish, something genuinely heroic in the choice to help others, even when that help might be manipulated by forces beyond understanding. The connections formed between characters, the moments of genuine compassion, the small acts of kindness that pierce through the darkness, these retain their beauty regardless of the cosmic horror that might surround them. The chosen undead, who shares their humanity to kindle a bonfire for a weary traveler, Solaire, whose optimism brightens even the darkest journey, the fair lady, who sacrifices her health to ease others' suffering. These moments of authentic human connection transcend whatever system might seek to exploit them. Even if their universe is a prison, even if their choices serve purposes they cannot understand, the love and courage they show remain real and meaningful. So let these dark theories settle now like dust after a storm. Interesting thoughts to contemplate, but not truths to burden your rest. In your world, consciousness is your own. Choices carry genuine weight, and the dawn that comes each morning brings real renewal rather than the perpetuation of ancient cycles. The flame that warms you is simple fire, not cosmic hunger, and the darkness that embraces sleep is gentle peace, not processed despair. Rest well, knowing that even the darkest interpretations of fictional suffering cannot diminish the authentic light that exists in moments of genuine human connection, in acts of unmanipulated kindness, and in the simple reality that your dreams tonight are your own, shaped by hope rather than harvested by hunger, free to imagine worlds where heroes truly triumph, and where the light that conquers darkness burns with authentic warmth rather than alien fire.